Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our July 8th, 2025 City Council Work Session. Our city manager will go brief us on the agenda.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. Good to see everyone. Since we've been together, we've had a holiday and we've opened up a new police headquarters. That was a big event, and I'm glad to have seen everyone there. I've sent you a few notices recently. We had part of our fire department deploy to Halifax, Chantel, that's caused a bit of the things that we've seen in the news, and some of the things have happened here in the Commonwealth. And so we, through MOUs and what have you, sent a part of our force. You'll read in that response that we're covered. There aren't any with the firefighters who've deployed, we've been able to backfill. So Chief Wormser is on top of it. And then also this evening, it's just, I got it on my phone, and I don't know if I'm just sensitive to what the news has been, but I got an alert about weather this evening. And so I reached out to Greg and Piper and sent you guys a note about that. We're experiencing severe weather through until 9 o'clock this evening. That could just be simple thunderstorms, but I want everyone weather aware. So just take that minute, Mayor, to kind of make those acknowledgements, reflect on some big opportunities for us with the police headquarters and also the holiday. And I hope everyone had a good one. And with that, Mayor, today's portion of the City Council meeting is largely with our city clerk and with the city attorney about rules of procedure. And also, I think we have a guest. And Mayor, I'll turn it back to you. You're welcome to Matthew to introduce our FOIA expert. No pressure there, sir. So thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vice Mayor, members of City Council. So I'm really excited for you all this afternoon because today is the biennial training that you all will do as council members. With us today is a senior attorney with the Virginia Freedom of Information Advisory Council, Joseph Joe Underwood. Mr. Underwood has been with the Virginia FOIA Advisory Council since August 2022. Previously, he practiced law with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance for 16 years, where he was chief legal counsel for the Tennessee State Fire Marshal and Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy. He is a graduate of the Cumberland School of Law at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, and the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. So I am super excited, and I am ready to turn it over to Joe to walk you through the world of FOIA.
Well, thank you for having me here today. I'll put this a little closer. I don't know if that's coming through okay. I'm glad to be here. I am also a semi-resident of Lynchburg, as my wife and I own a condo here, and we stay here when our son goes to VES there, and the oldest, and I have two more sons, and we live in Tappahannock, and we'll be sending them probably here too. So I'll be around for the next 11 or 12 years probably. So thank you for having me. Enjoy your town. And I love the new police station out there. It's gorgeous. I've seen that. That's pretty impressive. But I'm here today. Well, it's nice to have a captive audience because you have to be here. And so I get to be here to talk to you about it and talk about FOIA and what we do at the FOIA Advisory Council. Yesterday, we had three different meetings, our two subcommittees, and our council met yesterday. We tend to, this FOIA Advisory Council is 14 members, 2 members of the House of Delegates, 2 members from the Senate, with the 10 remaining members appointed by the governor or the speakers of both houses. We have Attorney General representative. We had the Library of Virginia representative. And and some media members and citizen members, and we kind of go through FOIA laws and issues and talk about what's upcoming next year to work out legislation that we go through and other issues or studies that need to be done. But we usually meet in the summer times when it's not in session and through the fall. So I was glad that was a busy day yesterday, but I'll be here today to talk to you a little bit about FOIA, and you can kind of, this is kind of our roadmap here, and break down what do we get to is the FOIA Council. Yeah. Oh, let's go. We're flying by me there. There we go. Okay. We'll get, so what the FOIA Council does is we provide guidance, education, and training. We are also there for consultation. We man phones and emails to help responses from citizens, press, as well as local governments and state agencies to navigate the FOIA laws. We publish opinions. I have a couple pending right now I have to be working on to provide when we get posed questions on interpretation. What we do is we take the rulings of the Supreme Court of Virginia and the appellate courts of appeals, and we apply the FOIA laws of Virginia to the issues we're presented, and kind of train on what the courts have ruled and the interpretation of what FOIA laws are. What we do not do, we do not investigate and we do not enforce. That's not our role. We're a two-person office. Hopefully soon we'll be a 4-person doing interviews later this week to get help. But we have enough work to keep us busy to provide guidance and information out there to all over the Commonwealth. And that's kind of what FOIA is about, is the freedom of information, that we're all citizens. All 8 million citizens of the Commonwealth have the same rights to access the freedom of information. And what it is, this law came about 60 years ago, kind of in the late 60s, right after about a year or two after the federal standards. But all 50 states have adopted their FOIA laws, or sometimes called sunshine laws, which is about the access to government meetings and access to government records. And Virginia does it very specially. When I was in Tennessee, we did it a little different, and I was in charge of a lot of records people wanted, and I had to navigate that. But now I don't. Most of our stuff's posted, and I'm just able to talk about what the law requires, and don't really have a lot of response to public records. But I can guide you on that. All states have certain exemptions. In Virginia, there are about approximately 150 public records exemptions. 54 approximately for meetings, to have open meetings. I can't say Tennessee probably has just as many or more other states. But what it is that we all have rights to access the records and the meetings of our government unless otherwise provided by law. That's the caveat that the attorneys write. And how we interpret that is those, I always talk about being like a funnel. You start with the premise that it's all open until you come to those exceptions, 150 plus in chapter 37, but there's others outside of FOIA laws that apply throughout the Code of Virginia that may apply. And then you have to narrowly tailor those exemptions. There's some more broadly attorney-client or working papers. Then there's certain ones about the maritime fisheries, their records, or the Virginia Space Department. They have their own specialized records, and the apple pickers have one too. So there's ones very narrowly tailored, but when you come across an exemption, it must be applicable to those specific records or the information within records, because records can have non-exempt information as well as exempt information. Most of the exemptions in FOIA are discretionary. Custodian, the keeper of the records, has the right to determine whether to exercise that or invoke those exemptions or not. But they're available for that. If there's no such exemption or one that applies, then the presumption is the records will be released. So I know some of you have experience with FOIA, some are new, but I'm going to kind of cover like this. And since we're sitting around here, it doesn't have to be, I know you are in a formal city council meeting, but I'll be glad to, if you have a question or you come to something you want to talk about, we can stop and I'll pause the slide and we'll move on. Because today we're going to cover public records in the first part, then we'll cover public meetings, and then we'll talk about what are the remedies under the law and any other things. But there's time for questions. But if you have anything now, yes. Go on. So that was the policy I talked to you about, that the law presumes that the records will be open unless otherwise provided by law. And it could be Virginia statute, it could be a federal law. HIPAA, FERPA applies to education records or so forth. But there are exemptions for health records as well as scholastic records in Virginia FOIA itself. But you're here today because you're required to have training every 2 years. You can keep going here. And you're not the only ones. There's a certain other members of directors that have required to have training, not elected officials, but I do a lot of training for just staff and for other public bodies that need advisory boards, because FOIA applies to pretty much every type of government entity out there, either advisory or not. Yesterday, our conversation with the FOIA Council was about the 88 advisory boards in Fairfax County and how can we help them follow the laws of FOIA when they're not professional or, they're not elected or just volunteers. And so we try to guide that spectrum of FOIA in Virginia. But you can keep going. But I know you're here, and what we'll do is this training I issued that we'll give you a certificate that's good for 2 years and keep it to the record of your clerk, and he'll keep it for 5 years, and then that'll be pretty much you're covered. And I'll see you again in 2 years, or anytime you want to have me back, I'll be glad to come back. But it's really for all elected, re-elected, appointed, reappointed officials. They're the ones who are required to have it and become familiar with the code. Now, on our website, we have a lot of information. Our website is dated. It is from the 1999, and it is bright yellow, like sunshine. But we do have really good tabs, and we do upload the information periodically. We're working currently. July 1st is usually when we'll enactment of laws, and we try to update all of our records regarding whether it's charges guide or access guides or 911 call response guides or just other things. Electronic meetings, we have one. We have social media guide, and we update those as we can. When the law changes, we provide it. We have a law enforcement guide that's approximately about 30-something pages, but we have a lot of that. And you can access Title 2.2-3700. That's the FOIA chapter that we're talking about, and that's where I'll be referring to most of the time. You'll see I'll really rely to the last 37. It is 3700 to 3715. So when I talk about certain things, I may refer to those particular sections. But there are other laws outside of FOIA, as I mentioned there. There's an exemption for tax information that's held by the tax officials, the Commissioner of Revenue, and that's entitled 55.3-1. That there's a provision there. If they release a tax record, there's a possible penalty of a misdemeanor crime and punishment and time in jail. Let me provide you that the rest of FOIA does not have such provisions. Chapter 3700 does not have any jail time or completion. There is a possibility for civil penalties or other punitive damage monetary, but there's no one going to jail currently for violation of FOIA. So I don't want you to think about that, but it could cost taxpayers some money. So, but that was just get out there. But there are other areas, like I said, in the tax code that does have a provision for more punitive punishment. And when they come to a conflict between their law and maybe FOIA, they're going to favor their exemption because they do not want to wind up in jail. And our advice is, we understand, and since that is outside of our purview of Chapter 37, we would defer to you. Our guidance is limited to Title 2.2, Chapter 3700. There are other provisions. 15.2 for local governments, 22.1 for school boards. Those provisions apply to those bodies are maybe more stringent than what FOIA requires, and we will tell you to defer to your legal counsel on those issues. They can provide you information. If I tell you something today and you want to check with your attorney, we advise you to check with your attorney. He's the one who represents you and provides you your legal counsel to the best of his ability. Same to a school board. I'm not a school board attorney for many reasons, but I am not going to be giving them guidance on laws as the case of that. So, but we will talk to you about FOIA and provide that, and we do provide advice. As similar to home, I give advice all the time at home. It's not followed all the time. I know in the real world it's not followed either, but that's what we're here to do, and does not hurt my feelings. But we do try to provide the same amount of information to either a citizen who calls us and they're angry at a public body, and then we get to hang up the phone and we talk to the public body and they give us advice. We tell them the same advice. We tell them what we interpret and understand the law to be, and give them advice and guidance. And most of the guidance you'll find, some of these exemptions I was just talking about, 58.1-3 there, the 22.1 is the school boards, and then there's 15.2 about public hearings, because that's where you require them about posting in newspapers and other requirements and notices. That's not a FOIA, that's provisions of other Virginia code areas. If you deal with court records, courts are allowed pretty much provide their own rules for their records, and we defer to the clerks of the courts to do that. So, well, what is a public record? A public record is pretty much any type of writing or recording, photo, microfiche, maybe stone tablet if you still have it, if you're old enough government. It's anything that's written or recorded that is in the transaction of public business. Okay? Can be draft versions of such records. What it is not all emails are not necessarily public records. the emails you send to your staff or coworkers to get lunch, to have plans for the Christmas party or so forth, not really transacting public business. Those would be applicable to FOIA, but FOIA applies to public records. And wherever it is, digital data, spreadsheets or so forth, that's a transaction of public business are subject to FOIA. That's the big caption. And then when you go down to figure out which one exclusion of which records are excluded. Okay. So I know a lot of times public bodies get requests for all emails or correspondence and so forth. That requires the right to go through and review those because, like I said, that email to your coworker about whether her child won the ball game last night or what your lunch plans are, after work plans, those don't apply to that and would be not applicable to a public records request. It's just that in transfixion of public records. Now, a requester can either inspect, ask to inspect, or copy. It's the requester's choice. A lot of times requesters think that inspection could be free. Well, that's not necessarily so, because what happens is when a request is submitted, either verbally or in written form, it can be either one, that once you receive it, you have to respond accordingly, but you have to prepare the records or review the records to provide what is excluded or not to provide to them. When a requester asks to inspect, the only thing they're saving money on is the copying with the digital copies, because there is labor entailed in preparation and production of the records requested. So a lot much difference, but they have the right to decide that, and that's just can make it, like I said, oral or verbal. Oral, same thing as verbal, but they can have written form. You can't require them to fill out a form. You can have it has been updated, but for the generic part of it is still that way. So when the law really is kind of sends it up as a straight line process, one request, one response. Well, we know in real life with the emails and so forth, the communication is a lot faster. Things can change. And so you just have to kind of work with the system with what we have. So right now, the FOIA Council has adopted the policy regarding out-of-state requesters is that you can treat them as an in-state requester. You can provide them the records. You don't have to deny for just being out-of-state. You can still do that. The law provided there's a U.S. Supreme Court case where two citizens from outside the Commonwealth sued the public body in Virginia that they were denied their constitutional rights to access to Freedom of Information Act. But freedom of information is not a constitutional right. It's a law passed by all 50 states. So the U.S. Supreme Court held that Virginia FOIA is Virginia citizens, so they had a right to do that. Now, when those requesters had a cousin, a friend, family, Somebody else who was a citizen of Virginia, they could just submitted the same request on their behalf. So there are ways around this law. So that's what we don't encourage you to deny for strictly out of state. If someone does submit a request from out of state, you are allowed more time to respond. You can receive payment up front. You're a little more negotiation because FOIA limits what a public body can respond to a Virginia citizen requiring. But now it's required, you have more flexibility. But in state, you're required to certain timelines to respond, to provide 5 days. This kind of rules, public records rules of 5, and how you respond. But out of state, you can work negotiation a little bit more. FOIA still allows for negotiation for Virginia citizens. It encourages a requester and a public body to work together. And there's at least 3 parts of the statute where there's a duty on the public body to make reasonable efforts to work with the requester. There's no such requirement for a requester to be reasonable. A requester just has to make a reasonably specific request. You can go to the next slide. But you'll find that most requesters, I think most of them will work with you and understand. They can grant more time, perhaps and a reduction of fees, but is to be able to, that when they submit the request, they must be able to reasonably identify what records they're seeking, date, subject matter, persons, anything to narrowify. If you can't understand, if the custodian don't understand what they're looking for, then you can't really respond appropriately. So you can clarify that. You can't ask them why, like I mentioned, but you can ask them to clarify and to substantiate what they want. You can request their name and legal address, not required to. You can still do that. I believe that was in the law because, like I said, it was mailing it back, where to send the bill. Because in Virginia, when you get to charges, anything under $200, you produce the records and then you bill afterwards. If it's over $200 is the only time you can require payment prior to receiving the records. In other states, which I came from, you weren't getting your records for $20 unless I had the $20 in my hand. It's just, but the way in Virginia the law is, if it's under $200, you produce the records and then bill them. And if they don't pay, then you can deny them afterwards. If they don't pay the bill that was billed to them after 30 days, any subsequent future requests by that requester can be denied for that. But it is up to the requester to have copies or electronically or paper copies or to inspect, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. Any questions about that, about reasonable specificity? It's not a defined term. It's just what is able to identify the records being requested. And you'll find a lot of times when the request is submitted, maybe a requester doesn't know what they're looking for. They just think they're searching for anything. And that helps clarifying that will help them narrow it. And that's the understanding. There are no limits to how many FOIA requests a citizen can make. We were talking about that yesterday at the council about vexatious request. What is a vexatious request? Well, there's a lot of terms to that. Is that just too many requests? Well, if you're a member of the media, you may have to make a lot of requests, or you're tracking something or trying to find out something in the line of a history of something. So numerous shouldn't necessarily be vexatious. I think they were a lot of states elected vexatious to impede the operation of government. And that's really what they're doing. But we all have rights. We're all citizens. There's time where we're going to want records for our government. So we're going to need to be able to clarify and see, understand what we want. But we can make a number of requests as long as we're paying for them. Keep our bills paid on that. But you can make a limited request. I think sometimes requesters want to order the whole apple cart instead of just buying the apple at a time, and then makes it a little more reasonable. And so you can work with them sometimes. Hopefully they can be reasonable with you. But once you receive requests, kind of the rules of 5 start for public records. You have 5 working days in which to respond. That's in receipt of the request, not when it's sent. So I had a request of the day, angry that the public body, when they sent the email at 5:30 on a Friday, which was followed by a public holiday on a Monday and then a snow day on a Wednesday, while they weren't getting their records in 5 days. And I explained to them, well, you sent it to them after their work day had left. They really didn't receive it until the following week. And the starting of the day is start the day after receipt. So day 1 is the day after receiving the request. So calculation of that is 5 work days. And then you have 5 responses, and we'll get to that here. But if you fail to respond appropriately with the 5 responses I'm about to talk about, it will be it's deemed an automatic denial under law and an automatic violation of law. Don't want that one. That's the one thing you don't want. You want to make some kind of response within the 5 days, and there are 5 permissible responses. But if you're negotiating or other things with the requester, you do want some kind of written email training of understanding of acknowledgement. Similar to when they ask for an estimate, you provide the time is, well, once you receive a request, a public body is on the time the clock starts tipping until they provide them the notification, they have to initially provide them a notification that a public body can charge for the production of records and that the requester has a right to an estimate. If a requester wants an estimate, then the public body has to provide that, and that will toll the time. Okay, if it's over the $200, if the public body is determined it's over $200, requiring an advance deposit will toll the time, and we'll get to a little bit in a second. But yes, sir, you have a question? Sure.
Just to clarify. So does the time clock start when they receive it or when they acknowledge it?
When it's received, it says when the request is received.
So when the request is received, if an email is sent,
So if you have say when a case, someone sent an email at 5:30 on a Friday. I don't open my box. I say I'm out. It was a public holiday that Monday because you don't count weekends and public holidays or offices closed. It was a Tuesday. The office opened. I go and check my email that Tuesday. Well, day one was going to be Wednesday, but there was a snow day. The office was closed. Day one was that Thursday. So it kind of works that way. I did have a local town, a small town in southern Virginia one time said, well, I'm going out on vacation for 2 weeks. Can I just put a notice up that we're not receiving any FOIA requests? I said, that's not, the law doesn't work that way. You need to have more than a single point of failure. She was the only clerk in the small town office. So
I guess with that being the case, if they have an auto response, if you email,
that will trigger it. Yeah,
an auto responder will trigger the time clock.
Proceed. Yeah, it could. It could be interpreted that way.
Okay.
I don't know of a court case that's ruled on that. But yes, the automatic response, if you have that, which is benefit of public things, but it does start the clock quicker. And that automatic response probably has the catchphrase of you have a right to an estimate and we have the right to charge. It's probably what it provides. Now, you can't wait to find out with an estimate because the clock's ticking. So if you haven't proceeded, you must proceed to respond to that because your own 5 days will pass by very quickly. Only if it gets to over $200. You anticipate initially looking at it and say, this is a large request, will take over $200 in labor and cost to produce these records. Then you need to notify them what that cost will be or what you anticipated the estimate is. That will stop the clock until they make a payment. Once they make the payment, clock starts again, and it goes by days. Now, if you come back and say, if they say they want an estimate, the clock is still ticking until you provide them an estimate. Say they say, I would like an estimate. I'll submit this request. I'd like an estimate. Clock is running once you receive it, but you provide them an estimate as soon as possible because that will stop the clock too. Because until they accept that estimate, if it's $75, that clock stops. And after 30 days, they don't accept the estimate, you can consider it withdrawn. But that they say, yes, I'll pay the $75, then the clock starts again. Any questions about that? Yes, go ahead.
So the clock, does it reset after it stops, or it's just a continuation?
Just tolls, a continuation.
Okay.
As I was dealing with a state agency today, and they had made an original request in May something, and then they came back, and then they explained the response and said, well, I don't want it that large because, as you said, it's going to be $10,000 for me to reproduce these records. Let me reduce my request. FOIA doesn't address that. It talks about a request and response. It doesn't talk about remediation. So really, you have to communicate, and that's where most of the times we find out with the requester and the public body is failure to communicate and understanding that. There are court cases out there where a public body responded late to producing records, but produced all the records. But the citizen sued them anyway. Took them to court, and the judge was like, "Why are we here? You've got your records. Just they were a day late. This is a waste of our time and so forth." That's a technical violation, but we're not going to, it's not punitive. Now, in a one case scenario, that might be fine. If you had a habitual or institutional failure where multiple hundreds of requests responded lately, there may be a different consideration. I've also seen a court case where a respondent was denied records, but the public body had provided late. Got to the court, and the respondent, the requester, at that time the petitioner, said, well, they responded late, therefore they should release the records they denied me under the exclusion. And the court said, no, exclusion still applies even though they're late. They make technical violation, but there's no provision in FOIA that says if you're late, you waive all the things. People ask you to waive fees. There's no provision for waiving fees, and we're about to get to that. But it basically says the public body may. It's like you're asking for the name and legal address, and that was in the law from the beginning because of the transaction of mail. It's a permissive, same thing as charges. They're permissive. You can You may charge, you may, or you don't. It's up to your public body, to each public body to determine. A lot of public bodies, when I was in charge of one, if it's under $10, we didn't charge. It was too much time to calculate and charge. So we waived everything under $10. But like I said, if it's over $20, we're getting our money before you get your records. But okay. Anything? Okay. Yes, sir.
City management can charge us for FOIAs. If we make a FOIA request through the city, what, excuse me?
Yes, city council members, just because you're on the city council doesn't provide you more access to records than others. Now, you may be able to ask the clerk or get records without having to. And many people, they don't have to mention FOIA to submit a request. They may not even know FOIA exists. They just want certain records. I'd like a copy of my tax record. Well, technically, that's a FOIA request, or I want something else. Those are actually should be treated as FOIA requests with a certain time response. But yes, if you FOIA your public body, and that happens on, and there's this, I think Martinsville's in the situation. If you FOIA another, if you want to FOIA, submit it to the price to a public body for records, they can charge you. They also don't have to charge you. So it's going to go either way. It works out. All right. But you have 5 days to respond. And these are the you have five permissible responses. And the first one, which is the only one that doesn't require to be in writing, is here are the records you've requested. Nothing's taken. There's no redaction or exemptions. You just provide them all the records. Yes, sir.
So I'm going to read something from an email. If you want to FOIA every payment that is completed each week, you may do so, but understand that there will be a cost to each report requested to cover the cost of staff time. Payment is due before a report is completed. So without any estimate over determining that that's, under over $200, that's kind of like, is that an improper response?
Well, I'm just saying, if a FOIA request, you can't request like, I want to request next month, your meeting. I want your minutes from next meeting. I'm requesting it today. Can't do that because the record has to be in the possession. If I mentioned over that a little bit in the public records, it's any type of written recording created, prepared, or in the possession of public body. So it may be a record that you possess of another one. If you don't have next month's minutes yet, you don't possess those.
Records that already exist in our accounts payable system.
If you ever, any record request there can be a charge applicable to it. Now it may be under $200,
But if it's under 200, they can't charge you up front. Is that correct?
you can't require the deposit.
Correct. All right. That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's the case. Yeah. If it's $200 or more, they can require a deposit. And I knew some state agencies were charging, but only require half deposit. If it's a $3,000 bill, they'd say you only pay $1,500. And I explained to them, well, the law allows you to charge the full $3,000.
Blanket immediate response saying, with no estimate, and saying you got to pay up front.
That would not be proper. You would need to provide them amount to be paid.
Thank you.
Mr. Underwood, if I could just ask one additional question. This kind of dovetails on these questions. How are the estimates determined?
That is for we have a guide, charges calculation guides, about 20 pages. It is based on the labor time of the employee who is processing the request and cost. We get a lot of questions from citizens. Why is my government that I pay taxes to charging me for public records? And the response is because the Virginia legislature allows it to do so. If they didn't want them to say, they would prohibit the public bodies from charging fees, which many states do. But the Virginia legislature has allowed public bodies to recoup the cost. Now, FOIA is not a money-making enterprise. It's not a revenue-generating stream. At best, it'd be a net neutral, and I doubt it's net neutral for any public body out there. But it's not to pay for new copiers, new chairs, and things. It's to recover the costs expended by these employees spending their time on a FOIA request instead of their other duties. When I was in charge of the Tennessee Law Enforcement Academy, we were in charge of all law enforcement records. And I had an attorney under me, and we would often get FOIA requests, and she would have to review these records prior to releasing information on a law enforcement officer. But there are a lot of exemptions for law enforcement officers. And when her our supervisors were wondering why wasn't the caseload moving that she had to deal with. We started tracking FOIA and so forth and showing that, well, she was allocated 10% of her time to respond to FOIA, but it was actually 35% of her time after we started calculating how many FOIA requests she received, we needed more resources. We needed something. And that was something we had to adjust to. And that's understanding is that these take time. You have 40-hour work days and you got a 8-hour FOIA request to respond to it. There's your day. I was dealing with the state agency the other day, received a FOIA request. They anticipate 88 hours of labor time to review the thousands of emails. And that's to be done within 5 days or 12 days. Depends how quickly they get it done. The public body is allowed to charge for the now. It's not benefit and extra other costs. It's the hourly wage is what's calculated, that employee doing the work. Now, FOIA response is usually seen to be an administrative or ministerial task. It can be done by, and that means it doesn't require a supervisor or attorney review every time. I've had a requester call me and say, I've been charged 4 hours for paralegal review and 4 hours for attorney review for these records requests. Does that seem reasonable? Well, our job, we can't tell you what's reasonable. That didn't seem right because if you have a capable paralegal who spent 4 hours, an attorney shouldn't spend another 4 hours, probably an hour or two less. And you'd probably waive the attorney fees on that. Now, does every request require attorney review? Not necessarily. Maybe do. We have written many opinions over the 25 years on our website. We haven't posted. College presidents get a lot of records requests, but college presidents also get a nice hourly wage. And if they're going to charge their hourly wage to review FOIA records, it may not be reasonable because they have about 4 or 5 assistants, it seems, who can do the same job. So what is reasonable depends on the request, depends on the size of it, and the courts will ultimately determine whether it's reasonable or not. So if you're charging, as long as you can substantiate and show that is reasonable, the court should be able to uphold that. But we do not get in we do not sit there and say something's reasonable or not. We're not the custodian of those records. Governor's office received numerous records requests. One time I think the NAACP sent them a request. They said it was $10,000. NAACP wrote them a check and they produced the records. Was that reasonable? It was thousands of records, 10,000 emails. I don't know. It depends how many records are requested, how long it takes. So anything you do that, you're going to want in writing though, and understanding of what you're doing there, especially you get to higher volume and costs and so forth. But the only one that doesn't require writing is if you provide them the records without any redactions or thing. And that's the easy one to go on with. The second request is that the records are being entirely withheld. The third is that we're providing part of the records, but withholding the other part of the records. And those two require some subsequent information. I'll get to that here in a second. Then the fourth one is we do not have those records. They cannot be found. And then the fifth one is due to the size of your request or due to the limitations of staff, we need 7 additional work days to respond to your request for a total of 12 days. If you need more than 12 work days, you can go to a court and the court can provide you additional time to extend the response time, or you can work negotiation with the requester. But if you're withholding the records entirely, you're required to notify the requester the law that authorizes the withholding, that's citing the exemption, the volume, and the subject matter of the records being withheld. If you're providing in part and withholding in part, it's really just the subject matter and the law that you're required to provide the notification, if that makes sense. But like I mentioned, most of the FOIA are not prohibitions. There are certain prohibitions. We deal with juvenile records, witness records, victim records, or social security numbers. Really, it's the first 5 digits that are prohibited from release, not the last 4 digits. And those aren't even in FOIA. They're in Title 38 or Chapter 38. But exemptions only apply. We used to when we had the police officer records in charge of, we had everybody's social security number on a record. That was how the system was set up. We got rid of that because we had to go through every page and redact social security numbers and release everything else. So we ended up providing a certification number that didn't have to be redacted. We could release that without having to. So that's the thing. So there may be records that have some exempt information, but non-exempt. You must produce the record with the redaction parts, but release the other part. We talked a little about charges. The charges are tied to the actual cost incurred. That's the limitation, how you charge. And it's the actual cost incurred in accessing, duplicating, supplying, or searching. Now, the searching issue also covers reviewing. There's a case that American Traditions Incorporated versus the University of Virginia. The Supreme Court of Virginia determined that reviewing records for exempted material include the searching aspect of FOIA. Therefore, that is a legitimate charge. So the labor involved in reviewing records to provide that is a labor cost that can be associated with the records request. Can't charge more than the actual cost of the public body. And if it's scholastic records, you must provide those for free. And the public body must make reasonable efforts to supply at the lowest possible cost. This is kind of, I've already covered a little bit of this, but like I said, if you need to determine as soon as possible if it's over $200, because once you realize that, you notify them in the estimate. Now, if you estimate it to be $250, but when you calculate the time, it's $275, you can do two choices. You can waive the last $25 or you can bill them if they've made the deposit of $250. Of course, if it's $225 and you estimate $250, you need to return the $25. That's kind of the way that works. As I mentioned earlier, some state agencies were only requiring half deposits. If it was a $3,000 request, they were requiring $1,500 deposit. And I explained to them if they did that and the requester didn't want to pay the left $1,500, they're out of luck. They can bill them, and then you're going to seek them, I guess, go for collections agency. So you really can require up to the full estimated deposit. Yes, sir.
There's no requirement to charge. If we wanted to
It's permissive.
waive and
Yep.
say,
Okay.
we as Lynchburg are not going to charge for FOIA, we could do that.
You can. And there's some states that don't charge for records, and some citizens wonder why, but you're able to do so. I think that I've also seen where waiving charges were fine. You know, they do it to certain citizens. Citizens didn't made a lot of requests, kept making more requests further. Suddenly they were spending a lot of time responding to a requester and they never started charging in the beginning. And now they're going to start charging. Now, charges aren't supposed to be used to dissuade costs to make requests, but at that time they were waiving for a long time until it got to a point where they were being held up by so many requests by people that they realized they needed some way to account for it, you know, not dissuade it, but to recoup costs because you spend your whole time doing, there could be a whole FOIA department. Don't know if a lot of governments want to pay for that, but they probably could these days. But we have FOIA numbers have increased due to electronic and emails can be sent at all times. The numbers of requests have expounded. Well, citizenry, we have more citizens, so have more rights to make that information. So that is their rights. Okay. But some of the exemptions, personnel records, attorney-client privilege, these are some of the exemptions that apply. Contract negotiations, procurement exemptions. So those allow for negotiations to be conducted confidential. So certain records regarding maybe a contract procurement or a solicitation can be sealed or could be considered confidential until the contract is awarded or not awarded. So it has an expiration date. Same thing for purchase and sale of property. Not the use of property, but if the state of government was wanting to purchase a property or sell a property, until that property closed, those records could be considered. But at the end, because of public funds, which is inherent to a public interest, the release of what the sale was, purchase cost, or the sale price would be required to be released publicly. So they have certain expiration dates. Yes, sir.
The attorney-client privilege. When we have a city attorney who represents the full board, and who asserts the privilege is my first question.
Well, that's a good question. I think we've written several opinions on FOIA about it. But that's more of a bar question, and it's going to be the client, really. Attorneys are going to keep the privilege because if they break it, they lose their license. So it's up to the client. It's really the situation. Now, boards are different because he's not one person's attorney. He's the board's attorney. So he's the entity's attorney instead of your end attorney, your attorney, or your attorney. Does that make sense? So, you know, clients can waive and they can get away with it. They don't get a letter from the bar threatening to take their license. If attorney waives it, it breaks the client's privilege, confidentiality. They better have a good reason, and certain characteristics only allow certain exceptions to do so if they know they're breaking the law or something else. But attorneys are usually not going to do that. They're not going to waive it.
Sure, that makes sense.
So it's harder for boards. I've been an attorney for a board. It's difficult because each of you have competing interests or different interests or discussions on certain matters or other matters. But he is the attorney for the whole board, and that's his legal responsibilities to the board, is what I understand. But that's not a FOIA technically, but that's my practice.
So if for us as an entity to assert that privilege, how would that happen in your mind?
But it's there. To assert it would be, you know, with your attorney, covering that to make sure it's covered. But I'm not going to go. I'm trying to get back off that limb. I'm kind of out there on between attorney and client privilege. But it is the privilege to allow for certain communications. I'm just going to say not all communications between attorneys and their clients are exempted communications. It has to be in production of legal advice. If that makes sense.
Would I have one follow-up question I think might be helpful to the group? Is it common for attorneys in these requests to assert the privilege, even if it hasn't been waived by a client?
It is to protect the client. Sometimes, yes. Now, there are boards who you'll get into closed meetings we'll talk about later, and things are there usually confidentiality, and maybe a board member will come out and start talking to press or something else or thing and release things that were said in confidentiality. That doesn't break FOIA, doesn't violate FOIA, but it could break the rules of the policies of the board members' actions. So boards can take action against other members, if that makes sense. So that's not a FOIA violation itself. So, but accounting and routing numbers it's an exemption, and it would fall under what we provide as a discretionary. But I'm going to advise everybody that shouldn't be a discretion. You don't release your account numbers. You can release names on credit cards, but don't give them the banking statements and so forth, because you will have issues with that. So, most of these prohibitions, even though it's a discretionary, I don't think there's every time you're going to want to release that. Now, if you get a court subpoena or records, you release those records unredacted to the courts under seal. They can handle it and so forth. So, any questions? We're halfway through. We're halfway through here a little bit, so we're good, I think. But public records, yes, ma'am.
So I do have a question about, FOIA is what people will turn over, where you're asking for people to turn over things, but you don't know if they're actually turning everything over. And unless it's a legal lawsuit case where things are being subpoenaed, you're
Right.
just assuming that they're being honest.
There's a presumption under FOIA that there's a good faith effort that a public
Right.
body will follow the law and conduct a proper search. We've written opinions on this. Recently, there's a Court of Appeals that referred to that the premise under the old ancient premise was that a man you don't consider a citizen would break the law, but you consider they will not break the law. You start with that presumption that the law is out there, that they're not necessarily going to break it. They're going to follow it unless you have proof otherwise. And that's the same thing with FOIA. Is the presumption is a public body will conduct a good faith effort to produce the records that have been requested, and then unless there's other cause to show why. The governor's office was, in this case, was charged with not conducting a good faith effort to produce the records that was requested by the petitioner in the lawsuit, and the court said that's not necessarily true. There's a presumption they did a good faith effort unless you can provide evidence or proof that they did otherwise.
Mhm.
And there's proof. I've seen bodies just be totally dismissive of somebody's request. That would be proof they didn't conduct a good faith effort. But the presumption they should have or would initially. But yes, a lot of requesters are frustrated. There's no conflicts of interest. If you request your records, there's no provision where that you can't look at that you can't review the records that you're in charge of, that the custodian has a right to recuse himself. There's no provision in FOIA for that, as you would in other areas of the law or other matters. So requesters, that's why the provision is when you're withholding the records entirely, that you cite the law, the subject matter, and the volume to give an idea of how many records are actually being withheld. So if I'm withholding, I'll withhold 10 pages of emails. Or if you've asked for thousands of emails or so forth, or 10, I'm withholding a box. I think the governor responded with them. We're withholding a banker's box full of documents.
Mhm.
Give an idea of a volume size, several thousand pages. If you're producing part of the records, but withholding part, there's no requirement to provide the volume of it because they're receiving some records, and they're seeing probably some have redactions, so they may have an idea of it. So that's
Right. But you can only go off what is turned over to you unless you somehow have proof that there is more.
right. And that
Another
happens
way.
a lot with communications, with
Right.
emails and text messages, because if you ask for one party for one thing, well, if communication is like a rope, there's two ends to it.
Right.
So if you need to ask both ends, and you can find out who has who or has what. So there's a way you're able to cross check sometimes. And that happens. But yes, you have to rely until you have otherwise proof that they're not behaving properly, then you can seek remedy. Okay, so public records have rules of file. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Before moving to the next section.
Yes, sir.
So this is a conversation I have a lot of times when folks are asking me about, well, it's not on your government email, so it doesn't matter. It's on your personal phone, so you're fine. Or it's on my Google Drive. Am I accurate in saying, and I believe I am I accurate in saying FOIA follows, in our case, the elected official, not the device or account?
It actually follows the public record.
I like how you answered that.
So it's not necessarily, we could be having this
The
meeting
public
right now.
record could go anywhere. If it's going to me, it's a public record. It doesn't
Well, if
matter.
it's transaction of public business, if I'm sending, if so, like here, like we're about to get in meetings, if I'm talking during a meeting and you are taking notes, some of you are, some may not be. If you're taking down what I'm saying, you're actually probably writing public business. We're doing public business. You're keeping a record of it. But say, hey, you're making your grocery list to go out later today, get it. That's not a public business. That's your grocery list. So therefore, that would not be a public record because it's not transacting public business. So whether the public record's in your personal email, personal phone, or so forth, if it's transacting the public business, whatever device, recording, manner it is that's in your possession or created by you is a public record subject to FOIA.
Right.
Now, FOIA applies to public records, and that's the caption. Now, FOIA doesn't tell you how long you must keep these records. FOIA that's called the Public Records Retention Act, PRA, and that's administered by the Library of Virginia. And the Library of Virginia will tell you how long you must keep those communications. If you keep communications for 10 years, but the Public of Virginia said you can destroy all communications after 5 years, but you decide to keep 10 years of it, and you receive a FOIA request for 10 years of emails, they are all subject to FOIA because you have them in your possession of public records transacting in public business. If you properly destroyed the last 6 to 10 years of those records and only had the first 5, you follow the law, properly destroyed everything, FOIA would only apply to those 5 years of records because that's all you have in your possession and so forth.
In that situation, my time on council is over, and some folks would rejoice. FOIA follows the office, not me. Once I'm out, if I have something on any device, whatever, they can't FOIA Chris in my personal capacity. They would be FOIAing the office.
That would be, well, the governor's office papers and so forth, they transferred over to the public library. There's certain retention periods. So all the emails in your account that you had while government would be retained by the government agency for as long as they need to. Whether the last day you're there must be kept for 5 years. I don't know how long communications must be kept. Just say it's 5 years. So that will be kept until that's purged. That time has been properly and destroyed with permission and following the form. Before we moved our buildings, I was able to get rid of 5 or 6 boxes from 1990s research, which was great because if somebody asked for it, I'd had to produce all that, and I didn't even want to look at it. I didn't want to go through it again. But that's what the time frame is on those records, not you personally. Now, if you left and start texting about public business, you're not subject to FOIA anymore because you're out of office. That's what I'm saying. That you can, but whoever you're texting with, if they're still in the government entity, that could be a public record that retains even though you're no longer there. If that makes sense. So it applies to the records. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Worked for the governor's office. I was the custodian of the governor's records, and we had to
Bless your heart.
create banker's boxes full of stuff for the state library. But one thing that was important was we had to understand who the custodian of the records are. In a locality such as Lynchburg, who is the custodian of email records?
That's a good question. And the FOIA law does not even define who the custodian is of any record. It says custodian. So yeah, it would probably be, whoever the entity, like I said, is like the public body. The town council, the clerk of the council will be the custodian of the public records of the town clerk. Whoever's approving, I guess, destruction or in charge of record retention and all that, that would be the custodian. Whoever has dominion and possession over the record, even though those aren't, like I said, that's not even a defined term in FOIA. I'm just saying what I would, if you ask me to define the custodian, who have the dominion and control of the records. So each of you possibly could be your own custodian of your email account, but doesn't mean there's not a backdoor access that HR has or IT can get to. They also may be a separate custodian. So that's why you have to coordinate when you get requests. And that's the hardest thing for a FOIA officer. I'll be honest with you. They get a request from a public who asks for each one of y'all's emails, and they have to reach out to each one of you. And if you take a day or two to respond, they've already got the request. Their 5 days is ticking, and they're the ones held responsible to respond. They want that information back as possible. and they're probably going to rely on you to tell them if you have it or not, or what you have or don't have, you know? But when you yell, and if something happens and there's a lawsuit, they're suing the public body. The FOIA officer will be there, but all of you will be there too, and your attorney will be there, and whoever else. So everybody will be involved at that time. So
A lot of times we get notified by the clerk or whatever that a request has come in for a FOIA request of our records. And the custodian or the people who are skeptical is IT or whatever. If I make a request to see the response of the custodian to the requester, is that a FOIA request? And can I then get a copy of what they distribute?
yeah, so FOIA requests are not excluded under law. If you make it, like I said, you create a list of who makes FOIA requests and responses, like we did to track that employee's workload. Someone comes in, well, how many FOIA requests? I want to request your FOIA log or whatever. That's subject to release, and let's provide it. But like certain things like neighbors, I have two neighbors were in dispute the other day, and one of them submitted a request to the public body, and the public body said it's $100 to produce these records, and he went and paid for them. Well, a day or two later, his neighbor came in and said, I want the same records he got, and the public body charged him $10. And they were like, the guy called me and was upset. I said, well, sir, they can only charge the actual cost incurred for the records. When they did yours, it took $100 worth of work to pull, review, and rebut. When he came in a day or two later, they'd already done the work. It's sitting there. They can't charge him. I said, if you got together with it beforehand, y'all just agreed to split the $110, you could have split it, but y'all were fighting. You just can't do it. And I said, this, sadly, say it's the case of the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese in that situation there. So, yes.
So mine might not get a big charge because they've already accumulated the records.
If they've already done it, that they should only charge the actual costs incurred if they kept the record. Now, FOIA doesn't require you to keep tracking FOIA requests. It doesn't maintain. Public bodies do it. I've got a call from the Department of a citizen who's upset from the Department of Wildlife was changing the laws and dogs chasing deer, hunting deer with dogs. So they were doing big public rules on that. And of course, the Department of Virginia said, well, if you submit your request, I need your name and address. So we know you're a Virginia citizen, not out of state person. Well, then someone came and said, who made the request? Who submitted comments or who made comments on these public rules that you're doing? And they had to release all this because there's no exclusion to keep those people's names and address out of there. There was no exemption that applied to that specific record or that type of information. So if you provide information to your government, like in that situation, name and legal address or what you're required to do, there's not an exemption necessarily applies. They can only to exemption. Now, if that a citizen signs up to want to get your emails or newsletters or so forth, there is a provision that with those who sign up for that notification, there is an exemption. You can't get that list of people to solicit them. But if I just provide my name to comment, or I stand up here and say I'm Joe and I live on Main Street and I want to Lynchburg, that's on public record in the minutes and everything. That could be part of it. So there's not necessarily privacy in that part. So, okay.
Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor. There was an update, I think in the last couple of years that required like a management system, right? Like an electronic.
Not in FOIA, not by FOIA.
That caused us to have to get that software.
So that's a discretionary decision. I do know that there was, I don't know if it was regulatory or if it was from a policy, but there was a requirement that localities create a standard policy of what the charges would be for, say, a USB drive or for copies, but I don't remember anything specific to software.
Right. And that's, you could set a standard. I've seen policies, 5 cents a black and white copy, 20 cents for color copies, flash drives provided because somebody may ask for a large volume of records you can't email in like 3 emails or so forth the system. If you don't furnish your own, and you don't really want publishers coming in with their own software to click into your computer and it will download a virus. So a lot of set this for IT security that you put those files on a flash drive, but you charge them for that minimum cost for that.
I think what I'm asking about is the software to actually manage it. So that wasn't a requirement. That was something that we did
Yes,
on our own.
it's fairly common with localities, but yes, we did it for administrative purposes to be able to manage the requests and responses better.
Because it just got me kind of thinking, based on what he said, if what the vice mayor said, if the request has already been made, then we should probably just publish those requests so people can go in and search on their own and not have to.
if you tend to have certain amount of records that are requested over and over again, it's sometimes easier just to put it on the website and have citizens be able to access it for free. Now, I have had a public body call me and say they received a request from a lady who's requested records that they post online. And they've out there, and she can download them at home for free or print them out at home. But she wants them to print them out and provide them to her in paper copies. And they're like, can we charge her for that? I said, yes. That is part of you're not making money on it, but she's going to charge you the time to print them out, paper, and you charge them the actual cost card. She wants to pay for something she can get for free. That is her right as the requester. But that is sometimes you face that. I don't know why I would do that, but she wanted them. Some reason.
I'm just thinking if you had a
and that may also be
directory
something to
published
do
of
with-
what's already been requested,
Right.
then
Well, public
people might
records.
search that
Well,
first.
and my friend, Mr. Chad Owen, which I'll be visiting in Roanoke on 1st of August, will be talking down there to the tax election officials. But he does the library management system for record retention. So if you have any questions, he's a good resource there.
Excellent.
And that may be another reason why you have software, because it helps you track, keep up with record retention of how long you must keep stuff. Because there may be a record of how long you keep FOIA requests if you make them.
Got it.
FOIA just doesn't require you to make them, but if you do make them, there probably is a retention requirement. But know those retention requirements. Follow them as our advice as best practice. I had a bad day when I had a request for law enforcement's records from 50 years before that was in a box in our basement that was moldy, been through several floods and a fire, and the inspector had to go dig them out down there to pull them out, and he didn't threaten to resign. He resigned on me. He basically, I quit. Somebody else could do this. And I called his boss, who's my buddy, who's a coworker of mine. And I said, well, Johnny quit. And he goes, Johnny always quits. So it's all right. He'll be back. but we ended up realizing, why are we keeping police officer records for 50 years after the date they retired or whatever? So we changed our record retention schedule to be more reasonable. If we took all that records and just scanned them in and made it that digital, we still retain copies. They would just be releasable by electronic. So, properly destroying them is what you can do. But if you just scan them and decide to keep electronic database, you're storing records that you have access to. They're still subject to FOIA, if that makes sense. Digital copies do not prevent FOIA. So, well, rules of 3 on public records. I said rules of 5 for public records. You got 5 days to respond, 5 permissive responses. For meetings, we're going to cover rules of 3. So same thing as with similar records. All meetings are open unless unless may be closed pursuant to an exemption. You can go on. Public bodies, you're a public body, we're in a public meeting. You can keep going. The key, the definition of public body, pretty much the key part of this is that it applies to any of those, but it also can be any advisory board or any board you delegate. So you have a subcommittee, you delegate functions or so forth, they could be subject to FOIA. Okay, even if they're made up of non-citizens, just citizens, non-members or so forth, if they're given delegated functions or to advise you on a certain matter, they could be subject to FOIA. Also, volunteer fire departments, local Little League baseball associations. If you're giving them money and they're principally or wholly supported by public funds, they can be subject to FOIA. So we'll find that out if we get a lot of questions over the years about fire departments. If they received principal or wholly supported by public funds, then they would could be subject to fall in FOIA rules, and their records would be subject to FOIA. Little League, same way. My county gives the local sports association the money to run. Their meetings, their decisions are subject to FOIA.
So an example of that would be like the Downtown Lynchburg Association. We support them with their full-time executive director.
Yep.
And
Yeah, most likely
a substantial amount of funds that they would be required to.
If the principal or wholly supporter, which is most of the cases 66.6%, it's not the hard fast rule. There's a case of the public body being found to be 54.6% supported by public funds was considered subject to FOIA. So, but the rule is usually 66. They're principal or wholly fund, and there's an opinion I did last year. It goes into basically if it's an appropriation, you're just giving them to them. It's not a competitive contract. It's a competitive contract. It's different. They're competing against they've earned it. That may not be subject to FOIA in that case because they're competing against it, but they're receiving funds through just government funds of giving of appropriation, then and so forth.
In that particular instance, the executive director position is a employee of city government, right? So
that would definitely say that way. Yeah, that seemed to be something, but it's going to be they're doing government work, subject to it. supported by public funds, yeah.
The way I kind of see it is if their W-2 says City of Lynchburg on it, they probably are.
No, all right, but like I said, the volunteer fire department could be a 501c3, I think you say, or some other nonprofits
Sure.
could still be subject to FOIA.
Now, what about an entity that gets, and I'm not sure what the situation is, but like the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance, where they're also the chamber and they get contributions from various localities. If that
They could be a
total,
regional public body.
the
Depends
total,
if their overall funds is 66% from public funds or appropriations, they could be subject to FOIA.
would that even include like public funds or payments to attend their trainings and things like that? Is that, all that?
I don't know. I have to research that more. I just know that, if it's appropriations or gifts or largesse, I guess I can't say right, but just gift, send out, they're giving this money every year. It's considered public funds supporting, and it'd be easy. If it's a contract, just to give you a contract, you may have a contract, but they didn't have to work for it. There's nobody competing against them. It's just giving it to them. It's just a contract formalizes the donation of money, they're subject to FOIA. If it's a contract where they're private, like competing against other entities to win and earn the contract, then it wouldn't be. So I don't know, like grants could see appropriation. They had to qualify for it. They weren't competing for the grant. It's just set up that's just the document that formalizes how the money is given. That would probably be seen as public funds principally, wholly supported. So
Thank you.
yeah, that's it. Well, the meeting has kind of been changed. Was changed last year due to one of the Supreme Court case in Gloss versus Wheeler, I believe, where some members had a meeting before an emergency meeting, and they were found to be a violation of FOIA. So the rules this General Assembly kind of came back and tweaked the definition of meeting. It still is if three of you get together and you start interacting and discussing public business, you're having a meeting. That's a violation. You can get together, but if you start interacting, discussing, transacting public business, it's a violation. The problem is if the three of you get together, everybody's going to think you're getting together, discussing, transacting public business, and you're going to be subject probably to a lawsuit and have to defend what you're doing. But the key is really that there is two-pronged thing. You have to have three or more members get together. The two there, when it says about the many is a quorum, if less than three, that's the electoral boards because they're a three-member board. If two of them get together, they're having a meeting, so they travel solo. They're out there on their own. They wander separately wherever they go. So if y'all get in a car ride to go to Roanoke for them, two in a car, you're good. You get three of you in a car, you may talk about religion, sports, and politics, but everybody's going to think you're talking about public business and so forth, and you're going to be considered having a meeting, okay? And you're going to prove it otherwise. So our advice, avoid that. You can still go to ribbon cuttings. You can still go to birthday parties or nursery. Maybe someone's having an engagement party or something. If y'all get it, you run into each other in the supermarket. Hi, keep walking. If you're sitting around having lunch together, maybe a little more conspicuous. But the key is you really have to start interacting, discussing, transacting public business, clarify. Now, what happened at the Gloss versus Wheeler case, it's changed, is that they had a meeting and the public started interacting with the members and they started interacting back. And it wasn't the whole board meeting. What it was, I think it was the Prince George County. It was there were some riots, result of the young man who died in Minnesota. And so they called an emergency meeting. But before they had the emergency meeting at 7:00, the local police chief, the county mayor, and the NAACP called a special meeting to meet with the public. 2 hours before that, 5 of the 7 members of the county commission went, interacted with the public. They started talking about things. Now everything falls under county. The court said all business was pretty much likely to come before the county. It was public business, which is how everything around the county was going to. So they were interacting and discussing public business, even though the public was the one bringing it, not necessarily the governing persons. So the General Assembly kind of, changed it that you really have to interact and engage. So if y'all go to a public ribbon cutting and someone comes up and starts talking politics because they know you're politicians and so forth, that's natural, but it doesn't prevent, as long as you're not interacting with each other, discussing matters that will come, and they define public business to be those issues that are likely to come before you or have come before you, okay? Those would be things you kind of stay from that. But you can go to debates, you can go to political gatherings, The reason they changed it because in Northern Virginia, the Democratic group, they had a council that had 5 Democrat members, 2 were going in and 2 were staying outside. I guess 1 waited in the car. Southern Virginia, the Republican meeting, 2 Republicans were going in, 2 were staying outside, and they went all 3 getting to one place at one time because they didn't want to see this interact. The key is you can go to certain things like that, interact, just try not to congregate and talk to each other about what things that would come before the city council, and you should be safe, if that makes sense. Yes.
What's the punishment if that happens?
So, well, it depends what it is. For meetings, so public records, there's usually civil penalty, release the records you withheld or whatever. But for meetings, what happens in that case, what they did was anything action you take that was found to be a violation would be void ab initio, nullified. So say you have a meeting, you meet improperly or so forth, you take action, and they can show that was based on improperly. The court, the only remedy is to go back and say, okay, anything you did was nullified. So and it could be up to 2 years. There's no statute of limitations of FOIA. So a citizen can file a suit 2 years later, and you undo everything you built on that one meeting that you did improperly, and therefore you have to start over. And so that's the biggest thing for meetings. Civil penalties are some of the most other things they can punish for the public board or public body for violation. But for improper meetings or improperly conducted meetings, they just usually nullify, void ab initio, because it was void from the beginning. It wasn't properly held, or so it wasn't properly conducted. So any action taken was improper and therefore should be just canceled. So you have to redo it. And that's what happened in the case up in Northern Fairfax County regarding zoning. They met outside of their meeting to discuss zoning matters, and it's Berry versus something, I forget the Berry case. And it kind of dealt with this too, but they met and they conducted zoning matters and voting on redoing the zoning issue when they weren't allowed to during COVID. And the court basically nullified their zoning ordinance after 2 years after the fact, and they had to go back and do everything over again. And it was a big lawsuit. And so that's the only remedy, and it's not pleasant because, like I said, you don't know what you nullified, and everything you did, you have to kind of go back and redo it. It's like having a meeting without a quorum. You really can't take action without a quorum. We can discuss and hear things, but no votes. So just wait to the next meeting and go over and vote when you have a full quorum and so forth. Yes, sir.
Building on what you just said. So if you have a meeting that's properly advertised, you start with a quorum.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Then you don't have a quorum,
Uh-huh.
and the meeting was never adjourned.
Well, you can still have the meeting. It's just you can't vote or take actions.
So you just can't take action. So you can listen and you can
Yeah,
talk because it was advertised and you're still in the same location, and
Right.
et cetera, et cetera.
And we took this public comment, talked to people, and talked about matters, but there was no voting. When I was in charge of the post commission, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, we had 18 members on our council. So you had to have 10 members show up to have a quorum. And it was sometimes, so there was 1 or 2 times when it didn't get, if somebody got in a car out or got sick or couldn't make it. So we would just sit there and look at each other and go, well, we're all here. Everybody's driven across the state. Can't take action. You can look at it and say, okay, we heard it. We understand it. Okay, any action, go from there. But we'll pass it off until we can fully meet and vote until the next time. But yeah, so it's just not an official meeting because you don't have a quorum, and which is basically the majority. FOIA doesn't really define it. FOIA doesn't address Robert's Rules of Orders or parliamentary procedure. That's not a FOIA issue. So we'll get to that here too going forward. So yes, sir. The last key of that thing I just wanted to say: a public forum gathering. You can get together, a meeting of another debate with the purpose to inform the electorate and not to discuss or transact public business. That's going to be the key language: discuss or transact public business without publicly notice, without a public setting. That's the issue. Yes, sir.
So, absent parliamentary rigmarole, 3 members of council discussing city business in any capacity where a quorum is not present.
Not necessarily. It has to be in real time.
So for right now, if 4 of us up and left and 3 decided to say, we're just going to keep talking.
Well, yes, it could, if they're discussing or interacting in public business, yeah, because they're here
Yes,
right now.
what? Yes, what?
It would be if they continued to discuss or transact public business, they'd be properly having a meeting. Now, if it wasn't notified, you know what I'm saying? If there was notification and so forth, they just couldn't take any voting and action. It
Sorry, you
wouldn't violate the
you
meeting.
spoke a little fast. They
I'm
would
sorry.
be properly or improperly.
Well, if this being the case that y'all publicly notified, it's open to the public, they could be here, they could continue talking because the public's here to be here and so forth. And it's properly noticed and properly recorded or notified, so forth. And now they couldn't take any action. Now, if they decided after this to go into a room and talk to three of them, they're having an improper meeting in the next room. That would be more of the violation. Does that make sense?
Sounds like there's a lot of gray area.
It is a little bit of gray area. I would not encourage them to stick around and talk and transact three, even after a public meeting, because really when it's over, the official meeting's over.
Yeah.
So if it's closed, but if we're still in it, if y'all just got and walked out,
Yeah, Mayor
Doesn't this-
Mayor gavels down and saes meeting adjourned. 4
okay,
people
the
walk.
meeting's over, then they don't need to stick around and talk, transact, but they can stick to politics, religion, and other things that are not as controversial.
So regardless of parliamentary stuff,
Right.
there's a motion, second, mayor gavels, people walk,
Meeting closed.
meeting's closed for all intents and purposes. We can discuss the parliamentary stuff all day long.
Yeah, because and the thing is and that's what happened in Gloss versus Wheeler. They had a meeting before they properly notified the emergency meeting where all 7 members of the county commission could be there. But 5 members went there before the pre-meeting and they got there and started interacting discussion of the public. And it wasn't where the court came out saying that they should have notified that was going to be the public meeting too. They didn't properly notify that and so forth. So yes. Now, if it's not gaveled, like I said, if it's not the meeting, if the meeting's still open and y'all just walk out, the meeting's not ended, then they're still in the meeting technically. Just don't have a quorum. But if you close the meeting, it's over, then that kind of gets more in a parliamentary than FOIA, because FOIA doesn't say when the meeting's over. But that's what would be technical
And
when
the
you look
courts
at
would
that.
care more for intent and outcome rather than parliamentary.
Yeah, well, FOIA's not going to, it's not going to be a FOIA. Violating parliamentary doesn't violate FOIA necessarily. Does that make sense?
And I'm saying in that court case, the courts weren't getting more worked up about what county?
It was Gloss versus Wheeler there in 2020. I think it was Prince William.
The courts aren't saying to Prince William, well, you didn't motion to do the
No, they didn't mean
the
that.
legislative intent of the body was enacted by what they did.
Yes, they went. The 5 of the 7 members went. 2 of them weren't invited or something. They didn't show up, and they were all found to be a violation. The whole body was, even though the 2 members weren't there, because the majority of the board still met there. So that was why it was changed a little bit. It was the law was changed to clarify that discussion or transaction of public business, and that and it can't be something. In that case, the court interpreted that the public was actually presenting, and they were bringing up the public business. It wasn't necessarily the board and the supervisors who were providing it or leading it. They were kind of responding to it. So it's really about the interaction. So we'll go to the next one. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Oh, sorry.
I'm just gonna lay it out. The elephant in the room, because I think there's several people here that know what's being discussed. I know the 7 of us do. 2-3 weeks ago, I don't remember the exact date. On a Monday, we had a public hearing. There were four people that Mr. Frawley had the floor.
This
Thank you
is
very much.
inappropriate.
There were 4 people that left after they adjourned without a vote, right? So there was no vote to adjourn. And then 3 of us stayed and listened to the public. No business was transacted, no vote was taken. But it was a properly noticed public hearing. Then we actually took a vote before the next meeting on Tuesday to adjourn as a whole body, to adjourn the Monday night public hearing, because there was never a vote cast to adjourn the meeting. So that's kind of
I got you.
that's the elephant in the room, and I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
Regards, I'm trying to think, and I don't want to, like I said, I'm not your attorney. I've been a board attorney, and I'm thinking of that. Yeah, the key about FOIA, it's not really about closing meetings. If you look at FOIA, it doesn't talk about any motions or anything. There's only one place about motions. It's closed meetings, and that's the only provisions where you have it. Because FOIA doesn't even require you have an agenda. It just says you have an agenda, what you must do. So the open meetings, there's the rules of 3. You have to have a notice and open for a meeting. You have to have a notice. It has to be open to the public, and you have to record minutes. Okay. Now, the minutes, it'd be interesting to read the transcript of the minutes of that meeting. When you no longer have a quorum, I'm effective, go from there. So that makes an issue there. But otherwise, a FOIA, there's no issue there. I don't think anybody could say that was a meeting violation, and that's what FOIA talks about. Did you ever properly notice an open meeting to the public? And being that is the keys. Notice, open, and the minutes are the three parts of the FOIA requirements. You got to meet those three under FOIA. Now, your group, like I said, 15.2 talks about locality rules. FOIA doesn't require public comments. You can have every meeting under FOIA without having any public comments at all. But that would violate 15.2 something. There's a provision you have to have public comments quarterly. So just to let you know, FOIA is going to be a certain standard, and then there's other levels that go up. Parliamentary helps you with procedures of how to do that. I think in Virginia, the legislature, some of they deal with Jefferson rules. Being from Tennessee, never heard of Jefferson rules. Mr. Robert was a Union captain in Nashville in the Civil War who wrote Robert's Rules, so we knew about that. But Jefferson Rules is interesting. I'm glad I'm going to do some research on that. But that's neither one's mentioned in FOIA. So I'll keep on the train on the track here. So we'll get to those three things. And notice not only because of the notice is the key things. There's three more things: date, time, and location. I did get a request recently that a group of attorneys were going to have a meeting on November the 11th at 3:00 in the city of Charlottesville. That's not very helpful that they're going to meet in the city of Charlottesville. That's not much notice, because where could the public find that? You need to give a little more than that, and we'll be issuing an opinion. But date, time, and location are required. Those are the three things. If you have a notice, supposed to be in three locations on your website. Prominent public location. I think I saw the sign downstairs. Most public buildings have it, and the glass sheet or so forth, and at the office of the administrator. So it's all three. You can keep going. So, and now those are for regular meetings, 3 working days prior to the meeting, and you don't count the day of the meeting. So for meeting today was Tuesday, correct? So you would have to have it posted by last Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Monday. Sorry. Don't count the day of the meeting. It doesn't have to be posted by a certain time, hour of the day. It's not 72 hours. It's 3 days. As long as you get posted, likely by the close of business by that day, you'd meet the requirements. Okay. Special emergency or continuing meetings, they must be reasonable under the circumstances. That's an interpretation what it can be. If you have to continue a meeting because it drew on, it was longer than expected. Recently, I think 2 years ago, I think Northern Virginia met until 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning all night long. I think they made a rule afterwards not to stay over all night and listen to public comments through the night for good reason. I think they could have adjourned to continue it the next day, and the public would have come back and been well rested. But it must be reasonable in the circumstances. Emergencies can pop up or special notifications. Now, emergencies have a different meaning in 15.2. You have to look at the requirements under that. But as long as on those, when you post the notice of special emergency continuing meetings, the notice must be posted at the same time the members are notified. That's the required simultaneously. Then there's the direct notice to those who sign up. That's protected under the public records information. You can go to the next. But what does it mean? Then the second requirement of open meetings is open to the public. It means the public must be able to be present. They have the right to record, photograph, film, or otherwise reproduce it. You can set rules about where to set the cameras and so forth, but they have a right to be here. You can't have necessarily a building that restricts public access or limits the public to be able to attend. If you have a building that's not allowed to do that, you can't do that. I think one of the biggest cases is the Wallstein case out of Suffolk. She was the former superintendent of the school board of Suffolk, I believe. One did not want her in the room. They had a room like this with open seats, but 2 people came. It was Ms. Wahlberg and the reporter. They told her to go next door where they're closed captioned, that was they had it set up for her. They didn't want her in the room. They kicked her out after many threats and calling the police. So she sued them and won rightfully that she had a right to be in the building, to see them in person, to watch their faces and how they interact. If she had come to the room and the seats were all full, she got there late, that was legitimate. She should go to the next room because that's a fire marshal issue, not a FOIA issue. But she did. There's nobody else there. She had a right to be in the room. If she, like I said, if it was full, she should have gotten there earlier. So you can limit capacity, but you can't. If they have room for people, you have to let them in to be there. So We encourage streaming and so forth, but it's not required. Now, the third requirement is minutes. Minutes are required to be taken to open meetings. Minutes are important. They're a very thankless task, but they are the official record. Whenever something happens, the first thing they're going to do is look at the minutes of the official record of that meeting. And that's why I get a question a lot of times, what do they do? Well, I says, well, what's in the minutes? You have to go back to that, and that's the first evidence the court will look at and what we would look at to determine what actually occurred. Local governments are required to post their minutes after 7 days of final approval. Draft minutes could possibly be subject to FOIA. You have draft minutes. If someone requests them, they could be released. State bodies have a different posting requirement. So just let you be advised of that, but they must be posted on your website or in a public location. They must include these 5 things: date, time, and location. That's the notice. Members of the public body present and absent. That's your attendance. That's to determine if you have a majority or quorum present. Then a summary of matters discussed, deliberated, decided, and any record, any votes. Records of votes must be on the record. You can't vote secretly or in private. You can't vote in closed session or anything like that. And any motion to enter closed meeting or certification must be recorded in the minutes. I was recently looking at a group of minutes from the school board, and they were saying, well, we make a motion to adopt item 1.3, 1.4, 1.7. No discussion, 4-0 vote. I was asked, does that seem like good? I was like, that does not answer the question of what was discussed. And the whole meeting was, the whole minutes, the whole meeting was like that. There's no discussion, no deliberation or anything in it. And only the votes were just, they did have a motion in a second. They did have that, but they didn't have anything else. I don't think that was very good minutes. And I think there could be an issue with that. You hope so. Now, live streams can be there, but you still have to have formal written minutes. Even if you have the live stream, you got to have, we would do agendas when we did our meetings. We did agendas, we'd record it, and then we had to post the final adoption of the minutes on there. You can have them all 3, they can see it, whatever, but it should be in there. Now, this is the big discussion about the legislation coming up next year. They're talking about agendas. There's going to be some more requirements possibly that adding things to agendas is concerned at the last minute. Currently, you're not even required to have an agenda, but if you have an agenda, which I'm sure you do, most people have on the notice, they post the agenda so public topics are available. That's good. It allows for public interest and communications. But once you have a copy prepared and presented to y'all, it must be one copy must be available for inspection by the public. I don't encourage you, if you have a public meeting, to have just one copy of the agenda available for the public. That happened in one locality in Southwest Virginia. They were having a big issue about their trash, and the whole county showed up, and they had one issue. They printed out one copy of the agenda and supporting records, and the citizens were angry they didn't get the information, and the officials' response was, I provided one copy. I can't keep up with it. And I was like, well, you should have made more copies. We make a lot of copies. You can recycle them. It's okay. But you are really only required to have one. So
what's the concern with an upcoming recommendation from the
council?
council?
What is that they'd wait that people would post proposed agendas, and then y'all show up and say, oh, we want to add these items and we'll vote on them at the meeting. And you add it to the agenda, and the public had no notice of it or no advice that matter would even be presented and looked at. So the new recommendation is that if you do that, if you add things after a meeting starts, if you decide I'd like to amend the agenda to add this item, you can't take final action on it at that meeting. You can consider it and discuss it, but the vote to finalize it must be done at a subsequent meeting, is what the proposed legislation was last year. Didn't pass the Senate, didn't pass the House. Good. It was pulled, and it's going to come back through. They're looking at it. Yeah, it's about, because the people are like, well, people call us and say, well, they added these things to the agenda at the last minute. I go, well, proposed
have they heard of
agendas
the
are
conference
just that.
report from Senate?
It could be things they just add, whatever is, they can't hide in the ball is the key. But there are other requirements for local governments, like newspaper publishing, certain things that they have to meet, that really importance of matters of budgetary. You have to have public notice and it's out there for a while. But it's adding certain things they were concerned about. A lot of it would be at a closed meeting for something. Seeing what it is.
If just briefly, I would submit, if in preparing that legislation from at least someone who used to work in the General Assembly and who's been doing this at least 6 years, it would be more prudent to have the General Assembly limit or put parameters on what councils and bodies can do in that scenario, rather than saying carpet, you can't do anything.
Right. That's kind of what they're doing. I mean, that was one way to say is you have to have an agenda.
Yeah.
And it had to be published. But basically it came and says you can't, if you add things after a meeting begins, unless there is a timeliness, the thing is a matter of timeliness or concern,
Safety.
find something that may show up, like you have a grant application that shows up, those things that you can reasonably justify being timely that you have a response to are going to be allowed to be exception. There's a lot of negotiations. We'll see how it goes. I don't know. With the FOIA Council, we take it as it comes. Whatever changes they make, we'll pass it
Right.
along, whatever it is, kind of thing. Yes, sir.
There's a, unless exempt. At what point can we exempt a proposed agenda and agenda packets? I guess is the question I have.
So currently right now, all you get is a proposed agenda. So it's considered, you publish that usually with the notice 3 days beforehand. And that was some of the things. When do they have to provide the updated agenda? Or if they change, when do they have to add certain things? There's no requirement. So right now, you just have to put a date, time, location, town council's meeting in this building, second floor at 4:00. Okay? You don't have to add anything else. Now, a lot of times you probably do add your agenda so the public knows what you're talking about. But if you did have an agenda, you need to have one available. Once you are provided to you, one has to be available to the public. So at this time, you can add things as late in the meeting. If you get an agenda that's provided to you and you say, the first thing you do is take roll. Then I make a motion to adopt the agenda. I make a motion to amend. You can just currently, that's fine. You can still do that.
So I guess the question that I have is what I'm trying to understand what an exempt proposed agenda would be, because it says unless exempt. So it would be
Those materials, not the agenda is not exempt, but the materials supporting the agenda.
Okay, so if it's like materials that we might be
Personnel.
taking into closed session, that's things like that. Okay, got it.
That's what it's applying to.
So-
If you had a personnel matter, or maybe your school board talking about student record in there, certain things, yes.
And if once it's proposed to members of the public body, does that mean once it's proposed to all of us? Or if it's just given to two of us, is that?
What's it sent
trigger.
out to y'all was really the
Was it
level.
sent out to all seven?
Thing. Now, I know, and that was kind of the discussion. Well, people will send out a proposed agenda, the clerk will, 7 days or a week before, the meeting. And then y'all are like, hey, what about that item we need to put on there? Then they'll change it. They'll add it to the agenda, how you add things going forth.
Well, they don't do that with us because we don't
That's
add
okay.
things to
You
the
can do
agenda.
that as long as whatever you addended to get to a certain level. Once it's ready to go, you have one available for the copy, the public to come in and inspect.
Got it.
And your website. That's the other provision that'd be posted on the website. Currently, agenda's not required to be posted on the website. Proposed agendas are not. So you just have to have the notice.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we'll go into closed meeting. I'm sure this is fun. We'll get into here is really when you have a motion to close meeting, you don't have a closed meeting during an open meeting. That was those minutes I was talking about the other day. They opened the meeting, went straight to closed meeting. Then they took the attendance on page 2 of the minutes. So that made me a little concerned that they didn't know who was there. And then I didn't know who was in closed meeting and then didn't know what the matter, couldn't identify. So the motion to go into closed meeting, it needs to have the subject matter, the purpose, and the law that authorizes that. So if you're saying I'm going to go discuss personnel matters under exemption law, that would not be sufficient. If I want to go discuss personnel matters of the administrations of the administrative support staff in the clerk's office, compensation issues authorized by a certain provision law, that's a little better. I had one town ask me, well, Miss Mary's our only clerk. If we say that, everybody knows we're talking about Miss Mary. I said, well, I'm a 2-person office. Everybody had personnel issues. We know we're talking about me. So I can't help that. The small offices, these laws are written for everybody. So really, but you got to have a subject matter and a little bit of purpose to clarify, open it. You can always run it by your legal counsel, but that should meet those 3 guidelines to make an effective motion to go into closed meeting. Okay? And a second vote, then you can go to closed meeting. I don't know if y'all go behind closed doors or you escort everybody out, whatever it is. FOIA doesn't address that. It's just that if you can go to the next slide. If you need someone there, I use school board, like I said. We're going to start, we're making a motion to discuss the janitorial services contract at the middle school district under this provision of maybe that qualifies. Well, then you may need the representative for the company who does the janitorial service, or maybe you have the principal of the school, whoever you need, who may not be part of your board, whoever can assist and talk to you in that. You can invite them. So it's not just the board members have to be in closed session. You can have other people invited. Okay? You're not required to take minutes in closed sessions. If you do take minutes, they are exempt from public records. Our thing is, if you're not required to take minutes, you don't have to. So it's your option. Some people do. I don't know why, but you're not required to. You can continue on. But once you've talked it out, you've decided we've done talking, we're done. I've heard reference that we voted to leave closed. No, you agreed the discussion was done. There was no vote taken in closed session. You're going to agree to go back into open session. And it's like driving on the highway. Closed session, you pulled off the highway. Now you're about to re-enter the highway. First, yield. First thing you need to do is certify the closed meeting, because this is a heavier civil penalty of $1,000 if you fail to do this. And the certification vote is basically that we certified that only the things identified in the motion was all we discussed. We didn't get off topic. We didn't go through, do a roll call vote. Doesn't require pass, failure. It's not a yes, no. It's just a vote by roll. Like I said, some of y'all may disagree. We got off topic. Okay, so what? The rest of you voted that we did agree. That's just as long as you vote. If you don't vote or certify it, that's the violation. Whether it passes or not, that's a different issue. Or whether there's a more yay or nays, that's a different issue. But as long as you certify it, then you entertain any motions. That's driving on back on the highway. You've yielded to the certification. I was responsible for looking at some minutes of a library board that went into a private. They came out of the closed meeting. They started making a motion to certify, and someone said, hey, we need an advisory board. So let's appoint these 3 members. And they had one vote. Don't know what the vote was, but to appoint the members or to certify the meeting. The muddled, and that was the first question. It's improper. Got clarity, certify, then take action, whatever it is you want to do. Okay? That's that yield sign. Slow it down, stop, and go on. Any questions?
Interesting. I've never heard the phrase that it doesn't matter if it passes or fails.
It's just a vote.
Interesting. For example, let's pretend, and I'm going to be here, Alicia. I don't go to the closed meeting that we had for boards and commissions.
Okay.
But I'm here for the work session, and I've left, gotten my slice of pizza, and I've come back. And I never come into the closed session. Me not voting going into closed session or not certified, like how does that?
Well,
you
no,
see what
I'm saying the motion must pass to go into closed meeting.
Coming out of it,
It's just certified. You're not voting to adopt or approve anything that was action you're going to take as a result of closed meeting.
Yeah.
You're just certifying that you stayed on topic during the closed meeting. If you weren't part of it, you'd probably abstain because you weren't there. You
Right.
wouldn't know. If you get there and 3 members agree that they stayed on topic, but 4 members said we got off topic, that will just be that's the certification, is that you're certifying that it did. Now, what that does may open a challenge to the thing, but it doesn't prohibit anything.
Let's just say I did, for whatever reason, I'm not there to vote on the certification, but there are 6 others. How does that? Is that fine?
That's fine.
Okay.
As long as you have a quorum of your board going forward, that's the meeting. If you have, like I said, if 4 of you left, you only had 3, you can't go into closed session with the 3. You can't. So. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So, yeah. So, and that's what I'm saying. It's a vote to certify that you stayed on topic. It's not a vote to approve anything or adopt anything. It's just an up or down, yes or no vote, really. And it's important you do it. These are some of the topics for closed sessions that may be used. Discussion of personnel, scholastic records. Like I said, consideration of acquisition and disposition. But once those consideration or decisions been made, then it must be released publicly. Decisions come out. But until you do that, whether it's contracts, you can review, proposals to award contracts. But whether you decide to award, or if you decide not to award a contract, then you that ends that. You don't really get to do that after the fact. Okay. If there are other legal matters, there's certain specificity. You have the ones with attorney-client counsel pending probable litigation. It's not possible litigation. It's probable litigation. So just to let you know that. So possible, anything's possible. They say probable is 50.1%, I guess, or more. Whatever you pretend to be probable there, it'll be more likely than not. Or other specific legal matters or safety issues. Okay. Any questions?
Sorry, I'm still not on this idea. Have you and your office determined or made recommendations to localities whether or not to stick with a yes, no, or a stamp of approval from the members. Yeah, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever come out anyway. It just says it's recommended a roll call vote. So it's a yeah, no, just
Interesting.
no. It's not. And the motion's not like we make a motion to take action. That says I'm certifying the statement that we stayed on topic or not. That's really what it is. So there are electronic meetings. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because y'all are not eligible for this except for the remote participation. And you must adopt an annual policy. Now, states of emergency declared by the governor or locality, you can have electronic meetings, and those would be necessity, similar to what we did in COVID. You'd go back to that and just kind of go with the necessity there. But the 4 reasons for remote participation, you must adopt an annual policy in a person meeting, and there's personal matters. When you use the personal matter exemption, you have to be more than just personal. I'm out of town on vacation. I'm out of town for business. I'm attending a funeral, something else. A little more information is required. Medical conditions are, of course, HIPAA. You don't have to disclose that, but you'd have to just refer to a medical condition enabled my participation. If a member is disabled or is a caregiver of a disabled person, they can participate remotely and still count towards the quorum. Okay? That was changed 2 years ago, too, or last year, I believe it was. That under those certain conditions, they would still. Otherwise, if you're a personal matter or otherwise, you do not count towards the physical presence of the quorum. To have a remote participation, you have a physical presence of the quorum in a location where the public can attend in person to be there. That makes sense. And yes, sir.
I also did some work for the Electronic Government Implementation Division, and we did a lot about digital or electronic meetings like this. And one of the things we discussed was the ability to have a chain electronic meeting. In other words, you get on the phone, staff person calls all 7 of us and asks us a question on public business that's before the city, and does it in a reasonably short period of time and asks, do we want to do this as a body? And then calls the next one, then calls the next one, and calls the next one. Is that a meeting? Is that a public meeting?
So there was a case where, and that I'm not going to weigh in on that issue particularly there because that sounds, and I'd have to think a lot about that one. But the case was this, and this is how I would paraphrase my response anyway. There was a case regarding a lawsuit was brought by citizens against a public body because they found the public body was having a chat box set up over a document. They had a document posted, and all the members could look on it and make comments to it, kind of like Google Chat, I guess, is kind of Google comment. And they were saying that they were improperly having a meeting. More than 3 of them were gathered together to transact a public business. Well, the court came out and said, well, they were having a conversation. They created a public record, electronic, digital format, but the conversation wasn't in real time. They would post hours later, someone else would post. A week later, someone else. They weren't having, it wasn't like a phone call, wasn't like an in-person discussion, it wasn't like a video Zoom call where it's in real time conversation. So yes, that's what a lot of people say. Don't send group emails because someone responds, somebody else responds, and suddenly 3 of us are responding thing. Yes, there is a fine line where you could cross over to start having an improper meeting if you're not careful.
So BCC is preferred.
So BCC is recommended. I've actually heard I've heard an attorney tell a state agency, do not send group emails at all. And I was like, well, I'm not going to tell them. FOIA doesn't prohibit it, but he's their attorney and he doesn't want to defend them in court because he knows you can. So I'll let them listen to him. But if you do send out a group email or sends out, don't want to reply all, or so you'd want to make sure those conversations aren't, because that would, that line, you're getting nearer that line to crossing over to have an improper meeting because you have communications in real time. So our advice is to stay away from that and blind copy or send back. So yes, technically that one call, if you have one person calling, you're not having 3 of you get together in real time, and they probably do that to schedule meetings. We had to do that for the FOIA council. We'd sit down and say, we're pulling some dates here. Let us know. We send it out. They can't respond to each other to know what they're doing, but they can respond back to us individually to let know their availability for what dates they could go up so that we can set a meeting to officially.
So let's get more specific. If that phone call from staff is asking for for the council's opinion on whether to get involved in a lawsuit, yes or no? And they do it within a short period of time.
Well, this is the situation. I'm about to get to the voting part. You have to vote on the record to take action. The public body has to take action. And I think maybe the next slide. Did we already pass that? Go to the next one. It's about voting. If you see it. There it is. That's the key one here. Public bodies have to be able to take action in the public. It has to be taken in an open, recorded thing. So we've had public bodies come out of a closed session and say, we've hired a law firm to represent us. And they're like, well, where's the vote? They didn't have a vote. So then how do you take action? So yes, if you want to get involved, there needs to be some kind of matter voted on the record in an open meeting. Otherwise, there's no official action authorized to take, I would say. And that's kind of what voter requires. That's why you can't vote in closed session, because the public needs to see to hold accountable what is the record showing the action taken by the public body as a whole. You may disagree, like I said, maybe a 4-3 vote. Could be a 4-4 vote with the chairman breaking the tie, whatever it is that has to be made. There's not decisions made in closed meetings are not effective until a vote is taken in an open meeting, and all votes taken authorized transaction of any public business must be taken and recorded in an open meeting. So that may be what the call should be is, can we add this to the agenda? We legit consider this matter to be added to the agenda for a closed, that might be more of a different than, do you want to take action there?
Joe, I have a question for you, just following up on that. Say it's not a council decision and staff is looking for guidance, not in real time, but looking for guidance on how to proceed on a matter. Is there any issue with staff reaching out to council members, say not in real time, but one at a time to see guidance? Does that violate?
That does. I would say it would violate a meeting. That's going to be more on your policies, your standards, because a lot of people boards, you go to the chair, things added to the agenda, permission to attend remotely. They run through the chair of the board, usually whoever runs or whoever's in charge of it. And that's however you conduct your business under your policies. Not necessarily a FOIA matter in that regard. I'd say that. FOIA is limited, and I'd say FOIA, you can go, no, you don't have to go back. We've kind of covered electronic things. State of emergency, of course, you have to have a state of emergency, and you can only use the meeting electronically under states of emergency while that emergency is in effect. Once it expires, you'd have to get out of it. You can go to the exemptions at the end. Keep going. Oh yeah, we have a guide. Okay, social media. FOIA doesn't talk about social media. I don't use social media. My wife uses social media, but I don't. Just saying that if you use social media to conduct or transact public business, you may be creating public records on your social media page. That'd be subject to FOIA. That's the kind of thing, the guidance protection I'd recommend. So, yeah.
So Facebook changes their policies, and now live videos are automatically scrubbed after 30 days. How would the city staff especially handle, hey, I want all the comments from the meeting of December 3rd, 2023 on Facebook, which not because of the government's decision, but they're just automatically scrubbed now.
Well, our guys, be careful to use a private entity to do government business. To do that, once you do, some localities didn't have enough money, had their own website, so they'd use Facebook or something to do the fire. And you start kicking people off, you start violating government access. That's not a FOIA issue. That could be a 14th Amendment issue, access to government. That's not a matter for us. Same thing. FOIA doesn't require you to record your videos. But if you do record them, you get to the Public Records Act, how long do you retain those? That's a Library of Virginia issue.
Well, then there'd probably be a debate about who's retaining them. If the comments being made in a private setting, even though it's a government account, is that actually?
Well, I mean, there's a citizen who could come here and record your meetings of your thing and post it on Facebook. That could be done. That's not about FOIA issue.
Interesting. Didn't you answer us an email on that about the system or platform that we're using? We got an email from somebody on staff recently. I think this very question
we
came
have
up.
it in another form, but I'm saying if I want the Facebook comments from 2 years ago, they're now being scrubbed every 30 days.
Well, it depends.
That's what I mean.
Well, that's to say, is that a government website, Facebook page? That depends on
Well,
some government agencies use Facebook to do their notifications, police departments, but they usually got to be careful. So the same, we got to be careful. We have a guide for it to be able to use as a quasi-governmental website. That's the danger of it. I'm in Tappahannock, Virginia. No restaurant has their own web page. They all have Facebook if you want to know what's on the menu or any special events going on. Not even Lowry's is even out of business now. Yeah, that was on a famous chef. What's his name? No, the other guy, the angry guy. Gordon Ramsay went there to yell at the Suns for running. It's been there for 50 years. They ran out of business in 2 years after he came by. So
I think it might be.
it's sad. It was really, we used to go there and get quarts or oysters, and they were always great.
I think it might be an Anna Benson question or response. Maybe it was, but there's some system. We got an email recently about it that we have that is taking care of the live videos as far as archiving them and the comments and all that stuff from what I
So I can't speak
remember.
to the video component, but I do know we have software that helps archive the records that we need to archive.
Got it.
Is part of the public Facebook that we use for official city business.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
And for FOIA, that's the public records, Library of Virginia. For public FOIA, all you need is the minutes. That's what you're required to have. So we'll quickly do remedies and penalties. Really, what it comes down to is if anybody's in a violation, the only remedy to go to is go to court, general district or circuit court. Any citizen of an issue, you're withholding records they think you should get, you improperly did a meeting, they come to us a lot of times asking, says they violated this. We explain we don't enforce, we can't compel compliance. Only the courts can do so. And they would go with that. And at a cause, at a court, all they have to do is allege a belief that their rights have been violated and an affidavit of good cause. Then the courts kind of turn to the public body to bear the burden to show that you're innocent, that you had training, you followed your counsel, you believed you're following what you understood FOIA to be, and therefore you go from there. And the remedies, I can keep going, is civil penalties for certain ones. It's expedited hearings, but the public body, and unlike a civil case where petitioner has the burden of proof to show they're injured or harmed, in FOIA, the petitioner doesn't have that burden. They just have to have a good faith cause to believe their rights there. The burden is on the defense, the public body, to defend themselves to show they follow the law, or authorized within the bounds of the law. Any civil penalties, it goes to the literary fund. I know we're in favor of literacy, but we don't want to go to we don't want to flood them with a lot of money. I don't think buy a license plate, I think, would be more effective than FOIA violations, because that would be bad. Like I said, most of the things are about willful. I've heard of citizens saying, I've requested these records. I don't want to sue my government because I could win attorney fees. I could win the case. And that's what happened. If someone petitions, they substantially prevail and the court is determined that it's unjust, they could award attorney fees or court costs. But most of that comes from public funds. And some citizens are like, I just know that's my taxpayer funds. Civil penalties are coming from the taxpayers who's paying that. They really don't want that. They just want the records they want. They just want so there's some who are reasonable and understandable. But
I never asked for a penalty.
So that would be it. And I've had some not ask for. They just want them to be right. And but you do have that 5% of the citizens who will be ready on the 25th hour of the 5th day to take you to court if you haven't produced their records in time. And that's just the way it is. But really, don't destroy records to avoid FOIA. That's probably one of the things. People feel like these automatically destroying your records, like Google Docs disappearing or text message things. That's where that could come into play. Again, a court would have to show that and do that, and have to have an intent to avoid FOIA. But that's there. That's not necessarily a FOIA issue. It's a Record Retention Act provision. But, any other questions? I took a little bit longer, but y'all had a lot of good questions and good interaction. And some of my other groups, I'll say, I've had to make sure they're still awake at times. So y'all stayed very pert and awake. I'm glad to hear. Yes, sir.
One is on this particular slide, improper certification of closed meetings. Can you just kind of?
That's that yield sign. Stop to discuss only
So
matters. That's that vote. If you don't do that, if you went straight into a motion without certifying that,
That's all that is.
that could be that right there.
Okay.
Yep.
So improper just means either
Didn't do it.
skipped
Yeah.
or
or possibly, I'd say improper could possibly be if 4 people said we got off topic and 3 said we did, then maybe you didn't stay on topic like you're supposed to. It could be a finding. Could be
Got
improper
it.
closed meeting. But it's really more about I think it's more about the vote, failing to do the vote, because it is improper certification of the closed meeting, not improper conducting of a closed meeting.
got it.
If that makes sense.
And then-
attorneys mitigate, we parse words out like we can there. Yes,
And then the second piece that I have is about the working papers, because you didn't really get into that. I think that's
I
kind
can
of
do a lot of that. Yes, we have issued the case for the Court of Appeals was recently. The lady from newspapers sued the governor's office. She requested certain records. They withheld a lot of the records under working papers correspondence. Now, the working papers correspondence exemption is listed to the officials who can use it. It's got the office of the governor, and then when you look at the term, they define office of governor to include the governor, his legal counsel, the secretaries of his cabinet, and other staff members. So it's not just the governor's records. It could be, and it's their correspondence. So any written communications to or from them could fall under that exemption. But they're working papers. We've done many opinions. It works about working papers or those matters of communications or documents you receive to make a decision that you need in your sphere of zone of privacy. So record papers to understand to make a decision. So Alan used example. Governor's got a new initiative to announce something about maybe voter rights. He receives many different recommendations. He creates 12 different press releases, but he uses one. Now, the rest of them are working papers. He didn't release that one. He considered them. They were part of his zone of deliberation.
He created it.
Or he didn't say people supplied it to him. People, it could be his state departments, could be others. He received it. Whoever needs to provide them, that department head or whatever, to that named official, the governor or any of his officials in towns. It could be the president of the university. It could be either the town mayor or the town manager. Can't be both. It's pick who gets to use it.
So it can't be the manager and the mayor. It has to be one of the other.
Usually one or the other, depending on that system. And we have an opinion on that in a court case that came out last year that one town was alleging both of them, and the court said no, it applies to one or the other, not both, because there's an or there. I've actually seen a state agency change their name from a director to an chief executive, so that they could now use that exemption, because this talks about the chief executive for certain areas. Those are the officials. So if they use these papers for their consideration, they would be protected unless they disclose them. Now, say like those 12 press releases, he started sharing it outside of his zone of privacy and used it, sent it out outside that. He's actually dispersing it. You're thereby waiving it. Does that make sense? So you got to keep the protection of the record.
What about once it comes to us for action?
Those records stay open. Now, whatever is considered before that, maybe it's considered under that working papers consideration. Say someone comes with you with the determination to take one action, but they considered the multiple different scenarios. Until they disclose those or release those will be protected. And it lasts indefinitely.
So the second something gets disclosed to us, it's no longer working paper. Is that correct?
It's right. It'd be public. It's not press release. Once it's dispersed or sent out, it's open. Now, the other 11 that they considered, never released, never playing, they're protected unless otherwise they are disclosed otherwise outside of that zone of privacy.
So presenting something to any of us with something saying that it's working papers on it is not necessarily, like, once it's presented to us, it's not necessarily working papers anymore.
It depends. It can be. Like I said, the governor's office has a lot of lists of people, and a mayor or a town manager could have a staff that help him prepare these records, or a department head. I need this for consideration of a matter. That could be sent to him, could be considered his working papers. Now, if he talks to someone who's within that zone to help make the determination, that's protected. But once he starts passing it out, maybe council members it could be more dispersing it, just, waiving that exemption.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
I'd hope so. It took us about 25 years and 5 opinions to kind of get there. And I wrote an opinion that was 20 pages long on the governor's working papers last year. Somebody said that was really long. I was like, yeah. And they're like, that was really legal. And I said, yeah, it's a very complicated issue when they're wanting the pardon information from the governor's office.
Is there a title on that one? I want to look it up.
It is, it'll be number 8 or 9 from 2024. So it should be, it'll just, on our website, we have past advisory opinions, and the topic will be summaries of it. But it would be one of the later ones. I think it was maybe 7. I did 9 last year. I've got 3 this year and 9 more to go, I think. So until they keep coming in, citizens can request opinions, other people request opinions. And we try to address issues that haven't been addressed, because we've talked over this issue before. We've talked over things. And sometimes we talk to people, they send us a question and we say, well, we'll provide your opinion, but it's not going to be what you want it to be. The law provides this and you're looking for this. I'm just letting you know this is how we're going to come out. And they're like, oh, never mind. I don't need that. We do an email too. We can do it. It doesn't have to be published. We provide opinions and guidance through emails all the time. Particular issue, I think there's one coming out about Well, it's one on the record. Like I said, there's one about notification of an attorney group had a meeting, notification and date, time and location. They provided the date, May the 7th, 2:00 in the city of Charlottesville. Someone's asking, is that enough? I've looked back through some opinions. We never really technically addressed location. We've addressed date and notification requirements. So I'm going to have to write up something to make sure that's published to show that, yes, more than the city is required. You have to be able to go find a building, maybe not the floor, maybe not the exact room because things can change, but definitely be able where people can attend the meeting, can find the meeting. Besides driving around the city of Charlottesville looking to meet where a bunch of attorneys are gathered. Excuse me.
Country Club,
Makes sense?
steakhouse.
So, well, I think that's it. I'm not sure there's anything else left there. Additional resources, we have a lot of on our website. We have, like I said, our phone number. Y'all will be dealing with the municipal leagues. They have a lot of guidance on things. The county league helps. School boards, of course. Anything else? Yes.
Maybe I missed it. Where can we get this PowerPoint?
It's on our website.
Okay.
And I
have
emailed
it.
it if you want to send out.
Okay.
Just don't send group email, but blind copy everybody.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
But no, it's on our website. This whole thing's on our website. We have other ones. We have ones just on public records, very similar public means. Those are about the same length individually. We have a law enforcement one we're due that deals with specific requirements for law enforcement and how that's done. We're working on to break out the electronic means to do that separately because that's getting to be bigger and bigger, popular and more. It used to be you can only do like your remote accessibility. It's unlimited. It used to be like total virtual could only be done 25% of the year. Now it could be 50% of the meetings, just as long as they're not back to back and so forth. But once you adopt the rules, it applies to your subcommittees and other groups to apply. Yes, sir.
I appreciate you.
Oh.
I was actually following along on the PowerPoint you did with us 2 years ago.
Okay, good. Oh, yeah. Well,
Still have it, some minor changes, but
no,
appreciate you.
yeah, we'll update a few things. We have some coming up, but like I said, our office is there to guide you. I know we like I said, we take questions from citizens and from officials. That's our role, is to help both of you to guide your way. And if you had staff, I'd say if you get a pickle of a request, don't wait to day 4 to reach out to me. Get me day 1 and we can try to get an answer and help you guide through it. If you wait to day 4, we're taking a risk. You're going to have to invoke that 7 or you're going to be in violation. We'll figure out what to go from there. But anything else. But I do thank you and I appreciate everything you do as a property owner in the city of Lynchburg. I appreciate your work. I know it's not always I don't think you get thanked enough. We appreciate it. I know I wouldn't want to be in your shoes in a lot of ways, and I don't ever plan to be. But I appreciate you taking that effort to serve your citizens and serve your city, and I thank you for your do. So
Thank you.
yes, thank you.
Mr. Underwood, before
Yes.
you go, I just want to thank you very much for coming. This is some of the best training I've received on FOIA. I've been a FOIA officer, and the information you shared today was incredible.
Mhm.
So thank you for taking the drive. Thank you for owning property in Lynchburg.
I'm about to go check on it right now.
Go check on it.
Yes, sir.
But like I said, if there's anything y'all need, our office is here to help, and glad to help with anything we can do. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Next business item briefing. Lynchburg City Council Rules and Procedures discussion. We're going to have a presentation by Ms. Timmer.
Question for you though regarding time frame today, because I do believe that this will be a robust discussion since there are a number of versions with the rules. What are we wanting to do as far as time frame and closed session? I'm willing to wait, but I want to be able to present.
Well, if you can hold off, we would love to have you make your presentation on August 26th at a work session, and you will have your discussion.
I'm comfortable with that if we're able to bring it forward to a vote.
Yes.
You know I'm not feeling well. I have the flu or COVID or something. I've got a fever and I'm not doing well, but I came for the rules presentation. So I just wanted to make sure that I can present, but I'm fine deferring for the sake of time.
Yes, ma'am. You will be able to do that.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, appreciate that. And my question is can we kind of defer the whole rules conversation until the 26th?
Ooh.
Is that acceptable?
There is one item that you all do need to vote on for the council.
Yeah.
That's the only piece.
calendar?
That's the only piece that I'm concerned about is the
Yeah.
calendar because of their requirement.
Yes.
So if that's if you're amenable with that, I would like to pursue on the calendar and then just hold off the rules discussion.
Can we have a head shake? Move everything till
Except the calendar.
except for the calendar until
Um,
26th
Yeah,
of August.
that's fine. Hold on one second. I'll look at the meeting real quick for tonight. You're not feeling well. Can we just vote on the change now and not have our 7 o'clock meeting? I mean, all we have to do is our consent agenda. And- All right,
Let's do the calendar.
Let's do the calendar.
Like you did it now? Is what you're
Well,
saying?
we have consensus that we're gonna wait till the 26th of August to do Everything.
But the calendar.
everything but the calendar. So we can go,
Yeah, you mean formally present on the?
yes, on the calendar.
Thank you. Yeah. So just really quickly, the calendar for 2025, beginning in August, going through December of this year, needs to be adjusted so that we can have work sessions here in the second floor training room that allows you to video your committee meetings at the same time. And then additionally, state and city code both dictate that in July, the first meeting, you have to set forth your calendar year 2026. So staff are proposing that that calendar looks like the 2025 amended, and you just need to vote on that as well.
Okay, let's vote on the calendar
It would be tonight.
tonight. Yes.
I've got one question,
Mhm.
maybe for everybody, maybe for the clerk, I'm not sure. If we're moving all the work sessions to here because of the videoing, is there any reason we couldn't just move everything to council chambers? Just curious. I mean, is that?
Same question about.
And it would kind of prevent the moving back and forth just because we're going down for closed session. And, you know, it's just a question that I have, is that something worth looking into, is just using council chambers for all of it.
She can't hear you.
The question that I asked was, if you're welcome. The question that I asked is if one of the reasons why we're moving all the work sessions up here is because we're live streaming the committee meetings now. So I just asked, why couldn't we do everything down in council chambers instead of up here? Because there's also more room for citizens to participate and watch and various things. And I know it gets kind of busy during budget work session. You usually see all these seats filled in the budget season. That's just my thought. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but that's where I'm at.
You want to speak to that, Ms. Reed?
I think the informality of the, or the change of scenery and kind of the setup up here of the committee meetings and the work sessions, just having the more like comfortable setting of kind of working through a work session. I personally like that we're kind of just sitting around a table working through things and then going down into the formal setting of chamber. Personally, I think that is appealing to me, that we're, you know, kind of literally pushing our sleeves up and having this kind of discussion and then going into the chamber for the really formal setting is what I like about the difference. And same thing in the committee meetings is that we're having a more dialogue kind of approach together. That's just my personal opinion. So you asked my thought.
I really don't have a preference, but whatever's best for the staff. I can do either.
Yeah, I guess the staff's
I really
opinion
don't have a
too.
preference. I know there's been a lot of adjustments now to this room, but whatever's best for the staff, I don't have a preference.
Mr. Ferrari? It don't matter. Mr. Deemer? You got us here.
I know. I mean, I appreciate what she's saying about the informality and the ability to, because, you know, I got to look way downstairs, whereas right here I can see it. It's more like Knights of the Round Table sort of situation. So maybe I lean a little bit towards staying here, I guess.
So can I have a hand signal for staying here? Ms. Tillman?
Well, I am not a fan of the informal voting process that is just general polling in the work session environment. I don't mind taking a vote. I really don't care either way, as long as there's access points for citizens. There's more access points downstairs. I like the informality of upstairs. I'll go with whatever majority of council decides, but I don't really like the informality of polling in the work
I got a
session.
question for staff. If we fill up back here and it's standing room only, and we got a hall full of people, is there anything that would preclude us from moving it down to accommodate our citizens?
May I understand this question? So if these
That's a
seats
good
were
question.
filled and there were not more access, it'd be like with downstairs, when we have a number, I think it's 154 or something like that, that's in chambers. What we've done is make sure that there's an access room available.
Overflow.
Yes, sir. So that it's streamed into that.
My question is there anything that would stop us from moving down if we're filled up here, or would you prefer to just send them to an overflow?
I have a thought too.
If it's a parliamentary procedure, you being able to recess to another location.
My thought, Mayor, if I may, was you're putting notice out that the work session is here. So you would probably start here, say, hey, there's a lot of people here. Let's go downstairs. I don't, yeah.
I think we could do that. As long as we could do that.
Broadcast staff.
Yeah.
To make sure.
Like you said, as long as it's in the same building, people can find it.
Right. We'd have to check with the broadcast staff to make sure that they can quickly make that transition.
Yeah.
I mean, Mayor, this is on the 7 o'clock meeting to vote on, so.
Okay.
Just leave it.
They can let us know.
Okay.
You want to hear what staff says?
Take it up to 7 o'clock.
Oh, yeah. I mean, do you want to hear from them now about it? Vice Mayor? Do you want to hear about what they're
No, I'm on Shaq back here.
Oh, okay.
I've been in Shaq's spot and I'm sensitive to make sure we can accommodate this.
Okay, Mr. Attorney, I see you on here. You have anything?
On this particular subject? I don't think so. As far as a preference, rules of procedure wise, to address the issue with if the room was overloaded, there's no issue with doing a recess and then reconvening in another location that would better suit, public access. I wouldn't see an issue with that.
Okay. Okay. Roll call. Mr. Ferrari?
Just want to, now that we're past July 1, I want to thank Dr. Day, and I'll use his rank. Is he captain? Colonel? Captain? No, Andrews.
Anthony Andrews.
I was just trying to remember his rank. Anthony Andrews, and then Colonel.
Yeah.
For serving on the school board. It is a thankless job, and I want to say publicly that I appreciate them for doing it. Certainly did not agree with them on everything, and I know in the end, I believe our division is better for it. And regardless of where they may have voted or taken the school division, I think it's important we recognize that they did volunteer their time, their mental energy, their efforts to try to make the best decisions they can for the city. And so I wanted to thank them.
Ms. Reed?
Great job with all the July 4th events around the city. The several days it was spread out, so people had lots of opportunities to celebrate. And then obviously prayers going out continuously to everyone in Texas. I know the governor sent out prayers and people all over the state have. So just continued prayers to everyone there and everyone that's joining in the search from Virginia, all over the country that's going out to help those families. So just praying. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Wallace?
Yeah, just again, thanking all those former school board members, also Dr. Gloria Preston. She served on the school board, appreciate her service. She was an educator for 30 plus years. I'm a principal in charge of student services that I've worked with her over the past 30 plus years. So we appreciate her service to our community and what she's doing. Also praying for the family of Clyde Clark. He passed this past week. He was a former principal, guidance counselor when I was at Easy Glass. I was really praying for his family. He gave these years and years of service to education to our community. And also thankful to Downtown Association, had an amazing event here on Saturday with the fireworks and all the events they had downtown. So commend them for all the work they're doing, keeping downtown alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a special thank you to everyone that attended the town hall. We had probably 75 plus to 100 people there, and it was a great discussion, was able to clarify a number of issues of confusion around the budget, around recent developments. And I'll likely be posting that video once I can figure out the cloud situation. I'm not a technological millennial, but we'll get it there. So anyway, thank you so much for all that attended.
Nothing. Thank you.
Mr. Beamer? I just thank everybody for being here. And thanks for a good work session. It was very common. Thank y'all. And let us try to stay on one accord so we can take care of our citizens. You know, I've had people call me, well, even you, about Jackson Heights and the funding and all. Let's take care of our citizens. That's why we're here. You know, I'm not here for my ego, because my ego, I guess, is no go. But I just want to take care of our citizens. And thank you all for the budget. Thank y'all. Each one of us, I want to thank you. Each and every one of us for our budget. It's done. And we can move forward. Thank you. Closed session.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we enter closed session for consideration of a closed meeting to discuss appointments for vacancies to the following boards and commissions: Central Virginia Community College Board, City Employees Appeal Board, Economic Development Authority, Historic Preservation Commission, Martin Luther King Jr. Lynchburg Community Council, Museum Advisory Board, Lynchburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority, and Building Code of Appeals Board pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended. I make that as a motion.
Okay, but Miss Alicia was going to do that. But thank you, sir.
Okay.
Second? Yes, sir. Okay. Is there any discussion? We're now going into closed session. This meeting up
We got to
here.
vote.
Should I call for the voice vote?
We got to vote.
Call for a voice vote.
Yes, sir.
Closed session.
Councilmember Feraldi?
Yes.
Councilmember Mischins?
Yes.
Councilmember Reed?
Yes.
Councilmember Timmer?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilder?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Deemer?
Yes.
Mayor Smith?
Yes, we're now in closed session.